you've
I'm gonna hit record. Is that all right?
let it
Okay,
rip.
and then I can cut out whatever's in the beginning. Just sorry. Go ahead.
Well, Cal, one, it's nice to meet you. I have a couple questions for you. I kind of I know a little bit about you because I saw your most recent podcast with Jason, or maybe it was the second most recent. And I also listened to an episode of your podcast with Luke Thompson.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Who's someone else who I've heard about from Jason. And so, Jason, I love in general what you're up to, Jason, because I feel like you're kind of networking people
I hope so.
who seem like they're up to similar things, but not necessarily connected. And maybe it's just because I'm kind of on the outside of this. Maybe is it the Bridges of Meaning community? Or I sense, Jason, that you're plugged into some things that I'm not.
It's kind of weird how it happened. I joined that a few years ago, probably a year and a half ago or something. And then Luke Thompson and Sherry, I think, were the first people that reached out to me. So that place is so busy now that I was hardly ever on there and I couldn't keep up with it. And then trying to do like personal things, it was so hard to keep up with. But I basically kind of kept up enough with them through private messages very sporadically. Now it's kind of turned into more conversations on Zoom and then met Cal. But yeah, I'm right with you, Craig. It's fun seeing different people connect that are amazing thinkers and speakers, and yeah. So I'd like to facilitate that the most I can.
Well, I think you're contributing to it
enormously. I need to resist the implication that I'm like an amazing speaker and or thinker. I was almost too tired to respond to that, but I didn't let it get by.
Well, Jason, I want to just stroke your ego for a little bit. The amount of stuff I've learned from you is just enormous, and the way you see the world, I feel, is just markedly different than a lot of people. And you've also, in the time that I've known you, you've changed really drastically. And so you have a special mind, my friend. So.
If you look at Jason's podcast and how organic the conversations are, how unself-conscious the participants are, and it's just so there's something about the mood and the atmosphere that make it so kind of, I don't know, I want to say weightless, effortless. There's just something about the space that he has created in his podcast that was what really drew me to it, because he commented on one of my conversations with Luke as well. Probably not even the same one that you saw. Luke and I talked a lot, and then so I checked out his channel. Again, everyone has a channel these days, but Jason's I spend more time listening to Jason's channel than anyone else's, because it's just kind of an interesting mood and atmosphere and society that he has put together. So
thanks,
I couldn't agree more, man. Well, Cal, can I rapid fire some questions at you that occurred to me while I was watching you talk to Jason? The first one is you said a couple things that caught my attention, and one of them was you used some phrases that have their home in special subjects. For example, you said you used the word chirality, which I've heard chiral come up. This is a word topologists use, and you used that, I think, to talk about feathers growing on the left or right side of it.
Yeah, and the root, it just means hand. However,
Totally. It's
really referring to laterality in general and handedness as an abstract concept.
So I'm curious what kind of things that you've been exposed to that brought you to knowing the word for handedness. And I had the sense.
Oh, I see. Maybe the first really the first place that I encountered that usage in a meaningful context was, because I used to read the dictionary before, but that was kind of like contextless word learning. So anyway, which is almost a contradiction in terms, but can be managed to a certain degree. I want to say, so the research on the 2D 4D ratio is interesting. It's not really that significant, at least it's not very informative about individuals, but something about the ratio of your index finger to your ring finger can give statistically, when you look at like populations, can give you information about how much testosterone a fetus was exposed to in utero. And but for whatever reason, that ratio is less pronounced or less informative on one side of the body versus another. And it was in that context that I learned that for whatever reason, well, see, the reason the fingers are related to sex hormones at all has to do with the so-called Hox genes that supposedly evolved at the same time that amphibians evolved, and that fish developed external genitalia, something like that. When they became amphibians, something like that. Unless you subscribe to the South Park view of evolution, where a monkey fish frog gets with a and anyway, just
Wait, I'm interested.
it was just a really funny episode where they describe evolution. Mr. Garrison describes evolution in really parodic and straw man type terms.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, for whatever reason, the sex hormones are expressed differently on the two sides of the body. And that gets into all kinds of weird, interesting questions about, why there are differences, of laterality at all, like brain lateralization, especially like the two hemispheres doing different things. But in that context, they were talking about how testosterone is more expressed on the right side of the body and estrogen on the left. So you can see it in terms of body hair, breast size. Things are expressed differently on either side of the body for whatever reason. So I think that would be the answer to your question.
That's interesting. I think I'm left somewhat without answer as to how you got into this thing, but that was answer enough. It seems interesting. I had the impression you're somebody who, you talked about higher order interpretive principles in your conversation with Jason, and it was related to the mode switching that you have to do when you're reading something like the Bible, because it doesn't specify the nature of the claims, and so you have to figure out, am I interpreting with this lens or this lens? And you said you have to have some kind of or interpretive principles to know when to mode switch. I'm sorry, I'm moving closer to my internet.
It's all right. I think we heard it. You were talking about
Yeah.
having to know the.
Yeah,
But I feel like maybe Craig is still just only setting up the question. So
I'm glad you heard it all. I wonder if you could tell me just a little bit more about how you think about these higher order interpretive principles. You seem like
in a sense, the answer is very literally. Like I don't really. It's not. I mean, it's just not native to the way that I think to really use multiple lenses at the same time. I mean, it is kind of, but my natural tendency, as I tried to explain to Jason, is to ask, what is the lens? What is the answer? In some sense, I think I kind of read the Bible like fundamentalists do, but also sort of more honestly, not papering over the holes in my overall like the interpretive approach, because I mean, the way that fundamentalists or evangelicals will read the New Testament is to say things like, well, if you just read it in context and look at what the authors had in mind, and if you really just take it at face value, it's really saying this, and then sure, but if you do all that, it's like Jesus also seemed to say that he was coming back in the lifetime of his listeners, a fact which is conveniently overlooked. So it's like, I'm not really into approaches that they only work because you overlook something. To me, that already means it's wrong.
Mm.
The right approach does not immediately reveal itself, but nonetheless, I sort of, I don't know, maybe it's just my debater's tendency to anticipate objections that makes me want to read the same way that my most difficult critics are reading, or my most consistent critics, because I'm really taken with the idea of universal salvation, really, I think, for reasons that are at least pretty straightforward to me, and for a lot of people, that simply means you're reading the Bible wrong. So I'm always kind of anticipating objections that come from the right way to read the Bible, which also I'm trying to also stay open to there being a right way to read the Bible that I'm just not using. And I find that's really the most interesting kind of debate, when you're not actually closed off to answers. You're looking to be educated or schooled, or yeah. So anyway, I don't know if that was any kind of answer. I
No,
read like a
totally.
fundamentalist. I am very literal in the way that I think. Literal is not even the right word. Convergent is the word I use with Jason. Just something in the approach that is very head on. That's not lateral. I make a lot of lateral moves in terms of forming associations, but when it comes to like sort of accepting say an answer to some question that has a truth value, then I'm very sort of linear, and I'm really just looking for the answer, so which is obviously.
Yeah, I like that a lot, and I've not really considered the consequences of that much until now. But it seems like if you're aware of that mode switching, and you think that there's a canonical answer or canonical interpretation, then you had alluded to this. There's kind of a decision tree that you navigate as you're making these decisions. Am I going to interpret the passage this way or this way? And there's all these forks in the flow chart, right? That could lead you to a specific interpretation of the whole thing, let's say. And what's interesting, I mean, it sounds like what you're talking about is you're assuming that it's going to be consistent. And so you're reading the text, and it sounds like it doesn't lock you. It's not like it locks you into specific interpretations, but it locks you out of them. You say, I can't believe that I can't interpret it this way because it would be inconsistent with this thing over here. And it seems like, I like that description of it. That feels really compact, but also it feels like that if you look at it this way, if you know that you're making these mode switching decisions, you know that you're taking a path through the flow chart, let's say, then there's almost this, there's a zoology of plausible interpretations, like, or plausible, that's the way to say it, plausible interpretations. But I don't think I've ever heard somebody talk about it like that. But that seems like it kind of falls on the ground in front of you after hearing what you've said. I don't know. Do you see it that way? Do you look at your interpretive journey, let's say, like that, or is it different?
I think for me, I'm really in a space of anticipating what critics would say for the most part. And so when I sort of laid out the, if you will, decision points in the interpretive process, I was almost laying it out from the standpoint of I sort of imagined, objectors or critics. But really more, I just see how, I wasn't raised Christian. On some level, it's hard for me to even still, I can think of myself as a Christian in the sense of, professing or trying to follow Christ, but
Mm.
I can't think of myself as like culturally Christian the way that people who actually are. Um, but I can see what they do, and I can see the kinds of decisions that they have to make. Like literalize, spiritualize, futurize, preterize. This in terms of that, or that in terms of this. And I just try to imagine what's the rationale for doing that, and that's just getting in the mind of someone who might have a problem with what you say or what you think, and that's really what kind of, it is a dialogue of sorts, I think. And I'm very intrigued by the positions of people who are not only more intelligent than I am, but also for whatever reason more linear than I am. And like a lot of those folks will end up being, I think, annihilationists with a position similar to, at least those who take the New Testament seriously, with a position similar to that of the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Mm.
I'm very fascinated that such a position exists and can be entertained by like Christians whom I would place in the first rank of intellect, intellectual caliber, or whatever. I feel like the really smart guys in the faith, at least by some measure of intelligence, they happen to have a view of scripture that's different than mine. It's also different in some ways from the traditional view, and it's also like it is very kind of like linear and convergent, and I find that interesting, because it seems to me that on another level I'm very greatly sort of outclassed interpretively by people who are a lot less linear in their whole approach to scripture, who are really a lot more comfortable with ambiguity.
Mhm.
And I would almost think that like the more spiritually and exegetically mature you get, the more you become like that. Not
Mm.
but I mean, but I see people who are smarter and wiser than I am, with different views, and I try to understand, why they think what they think, what they would say in response to me. And me, I don't really know what I don't really know what I think. I know what I like. I know the sorts of readings that I like, and I know the ones that I don't like. And I'm personally very reliant on philosophy in order to interpret scripture, because I don't see that how to put it? I'm not going to contend against you that scripture needs something other than itself to be interpreted. If you know that it is self-interpreting and you can show me how, then I would like to know. And as far as I can see, it is not.
Mm.
So, anyway, that's,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't even know if that answer was very good or not.
I thought that was a great answer. Well, you said a lot of things. I wish we had time for more. You said you can choose to read literally, spiritually, XYZ, and you had kind of a list of interpretations. And I have a friend named Stephen, And Stephen was talking to me one time about these different modes, and he had read somebody who has a name for them, and it sounds like you have names for them. Where did you pick that up?
Oh, I don't know. I don't really think about interpretation that much. Whenever I think about it, it just kind of goes back along the same lines. Like, I think about, okay, I'm weird, man. Like, I will ask myself questions like, so, some guy, who was it that predicted the end of the world? And
There's probably been a lot of them. I don't know.
there's a lot of, I know there's a lot of them. Yeah, that's a tough question.
Which one recently?
Take any guy who predicted the end of the world or who is now predicting it, and he's got his whole like elaborate scheme, right? It's like, it's a pre-trib rapture in a, overall like dispensationalist pre-millennial eschatology, right? And it's just like, it is, you might say, terminalized to the hilt. It's like specified to the like, most specific level. Sorry for being redundant, but I did warn you guys that I'm not very smart like at this time of day. But and so, and imagine he's completely right about everything, okay? Just nailed it, killed it. He just describes the end times to a T. You would think, well, he was correct and he deserves credit. That's naturally what you would think. But unless there is some determinate process that he followed to get to that position, and the process that he used to follow that process or develop that process was itself determinate, and like something that you could reasonably expect people to pick up on and learn. Unless these conditions are satisfied, then even if he was right about everything, it's as if he won a game of bingo. It means nothing.
Yeah.
So I think about, what if the book of Revelation was not inspired? Just asking weird, sometimes you can kind of get a sense of like whether a question is a good or bad question, if it can, if how to put it. Sometimes certain things make no difference. Whether you assume that they are the case or whether they aren't. And so like if Revelation was not inspired and the end times happen tomorrow in any kind of way, they could be made, the events of the end times could be made to correspond with as much plausibility as they have ever corresponded in anyone's minds, who thought that the end of the world was coming in, within their lifetime.
Yeah.
It's like, whatever, if the world were to end tomorrow, then whatever happens, we would find a symbolic way to map it back onto the book of Revelation. Just like if you wanted, you could do the same thing with the Nostradamus prophecy. And so, in other words, where the rules of interpretation are so plastic, there isn't actually such a thing as being right. Because, like Wittgenstein said, if you talk about being right, but there's no criterion for being wrong, and nothing that it means for you to be wrong, then you don't actually have any way of talking about right. So I think about that a lot in scripture, while at the same time acknowledging that certain readings clearly suggest themselves as more plausible than certain others. And I'm going on a long time here. There's more I can say, but that's kind of what I think about when I think about interpreting scripture. In other words, my friend Luke would say, like, why are you giving these people the time of day? And I give them the time of day. Like I think about like the implications of 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 their positions and their approach to scripture like more than they do. Like I don't know. I mean I take their position almost more seriously than they do, is what I would say, even though that sounds kind of condescending. Um, um, I don't mean it to be, but
I mean, I think if I could interject here, like I kind of do the same thing, and I almost think that's the right way to go about it, because you're trying almost to straw man your own viewpoint and steel man theirs, and it always reminds me of the book of Revelation where it says that little creatures are full of eyes all around and within. It kind of feels to me like what's going on. Like you're trying to, by you taking their position and looking at it, you're almost like got eyes in the back of your head type thing. You're full of eyes all around and within, checking uh and searching all over. And that's I don't know. But I also, let's go back to what you said earlier too. I would do the same thing with the scriptures. I was gonna ask you though, when you say inspired, um I was what do you mean exactly when you use that word?
well, I think what I was getting at was like inspired doesn't mean anything
Mhm.
because it can mean too many things. Because if I imagine
Oh no. Oh man. Cal, come back. What happened? That stinks. Let me text him. No, he's frozen. Anyway, Craig, how are you doing?
Yeah, well, man, I just, even when somebody's frozen, it feels rude to talk over them.
It really does. Like I wish I could cover his screen. How do I do this? Can I turn him off? Like I feel bad.
I'll be back.
No.
Did you do that?
No, I didn't. Hopefully I'll hop back in. I don't know, man. That was interesting.
You erased him.
Yeah, no, I didn't. Yeah, it does feel weird because you're just like, you kind of just want to like black their screen out for a second, give them a chance, come back. Yeah, I'm curious how that word is used, because I was thinking about that, because I feel like I've often heard that word used when people say the scripture is inspired. It almost seems a bit arbitrary to me. Does that make sense? Or like you could just say like, because it'll say they were inspired and moved by the Holy Spirit, and then it's like, especially in Protestant circles, it's like you can get stirred up by the Holy Spirit in a service and speak in tongues, and someone can interpret, and then it's just like, is that how scripture happened? Because then there's no logical coherence. That's what
like it just occurred to them.
Yeah. And like, and I take Paul and his writings and Jesus more seriously than to think they were just speaking from some like it just bubbled up out of them or something. Like I feel like they were more philosophically minded to actually come to these conclusions in their head. Like there was probably probably a unity of the two, where they felt moved with like emotion and by like, I guess you could say, inspired, or the Holy Spirit, and there was this inner working, but it also was it was logically sound. It
It was
wasn't
the
just
same way. Do you mean
Yeah.
it's the same process that we're using right now to try to figure out what's true?
Yeah, exactly. So
It
that's why
wasn't. It wasn't as if they were like an authoring puppet where God, moved their arm.
Yeah. That's how I feel like people or use the word inspired, though. It's just kind of like they go into a trance, and then there's nothing going on up here or something like that. But to me, and then when I look at it that way, though, then I have to sit back and think like, how the heck did Paul come to this conclusion? Or like when Jesus speaks, I'm like, how did he come to this conclusion? Like, or when he says you must be born again, I'm like, where is that in all the rest of the Hebrew scriptures? Like there's hints of it and symbolism and everything, but I'm like, I don't think it says anywhere in the Old Testament of like just flat out saying, maybe in the book of Jeremiah when God says, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. But it's not like it's all over the place through the scripture. So like Jesus will make these statements and I'm like, how did he come to these conclusions to say them so definitively against an audience he knew was going to argue with him? It's like he did the same process Cal did where he I'll send him another link just in case, where he would probably went through and anticipated what the audience of the day or what the people of the day would say. I don't know. It's just that's always been fascinating to me too. And I think that's like, it's been helpful to me. I think to approach it that way.
Yes. There's a thing I've heard Rob Bell say, which is that we might look at this collection of books, the Bible, as a recorded history of a people's evolution of their ideas about what God was. You know what I mean? They said,
Yeah.
this is what we think God is like. This is what we think God is like. And it changes over time. And that's an explanation for the inconsistencies.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you don't have to contend with this idea that God is contradicting himself, because it's just people contradicted, people trying to figure out what's true.
Yeah.
But-
I think I like that. And I think that makes sense too. A lot of the people, I feel like where it would be more palatable for Christians to swallow that as if we would say something like it's a process of drawing near or getting to know him better or something through time. Like, I think I've maybe heard people say something similar to that. I don't know, because I read the scriptures and like it's hard because like I've never really encountered where they contradict each other. Like they break up my categories. So they seem to contradict each other. But that's just because I put everything in these little boxes. And then the scripture has a way of breaking those apart. And then I realized it's not contradictory. It was just because I had things so organized in my brain that I couldn't see things clearly, if that makes any sense. Like the clearest one I know, the example I use is where God says, I wound and I heal, I kill and I make alive. And it's like, to me, those things were just in their separate categories. Like you can't do one and do the other. Like you can't. And it's like, but you can, like and it is through like this spirit of forgiveness where it's like you can wound and then you can heal at the same time. Because I don't know, it's like the categories in my mind were those things. I read them side by side and they're just like, wait, that's contradictory. But it's like it's not, and not in the nature of love too. If you start looking at God as love, it's like all those things exist within that concept, I think. Because love wounds and it heals. I don't know much else it does. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Interesting. I'm really almost surprised to hear you say that, because there's instances that have struck me as flatly contradictory.
Wait, do you have any?
The one that Rob Bell uses in that to make that claim that I just told you about a minute ago is a passage where I believe Joshua is going to war with these people. He enacts this act of mass violence. He goes to war against these people, and it says God told him to, because God told him to. And then you have a later description of the same events, and it says it was Satan, it was the accuser.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And it was, and I believe it was the first instance in the Bible of that name, of this character being introduced, the accuser.
Yeah, that's always been. Yeah, I think it's the part in David where David's numbering the people, right? And Cal's back. Yeah, and it that's always been interesting to me as well.
You're totally right. I was I got the story wrong. It is when he's counting.
Sorry, Cal, to catch you up, we were going through and we were just talking about scripture seemingly contradicting itself. And I was telling Craig that I feel like well, so go back, so jump back before that, we kind of went through, and I was saying after it froze up on you, I was saying that the reason I brought up the word inspired was because I said a lot of times it seems like that I've come across, I feel like, where it gets kind of used like in a almost frivolous, arbitrary way where people can just say whatever, and it's not, and there's doesn't have to be any logical soundness to any of the things they're saying. And so I was saying, like you mentioned, really kind of revering philosophy and everything. And I was like, when I read Paul and Jesus, I often think, I'll sometimes approach it that way. I'm like, how did they come up with these ideas that they're spitting forth? Like
I try
it's
not to revere philosophy.
Or-
Philosophy is what I do. when
Okay.
interpret. I mean, sorry to quibble about that.
No, sorry. It was probably a
but
bad word to use.
Philosophy is what I do when I interpret scripture,
Okay. Yeah.
philosophical theology.
But I feel like, I guess where I was mentioning that is I think that probably I would assume Jesus and Paul both did the same thing. Because I think when you read them, you think,
To
well,
philosophize, or did he just know it?
I think because there's scriptures that say he grew in wisdom and stuff like that, and he sat and was taught and learned. I tend to think that there's got to be some sort of a thread to follow. I don't really want to say show your math type language of like, Jesus, show your math how you came to this conclusion, but because I don't think it's always necessarily a mathematical equation, but I feel like it's not just some arbitrary words he spoke into being. I feel like there's a logical soundness behind them to what Paul wrote, what Jesus wrote, coming off of all the scripture before that and everything. But then we mentioned that, then we were just right before you came back in, we were talking about a scripture where it kind of seemingly contradicts itself, and whether it actually contradicts itself. Or I was kind of saying that usually it seems to me like it doesn't. I just at first glance think it does because I've put things into categories in my mind, and the scripture has a way of breaking up my categories rather than contradicting itself. But
So okay, so like we can imagine reading scripture and then it appearing to contradict itself, and then some angel floating down and saying, well, young man, it doesn't really contradict itself. This is just an inadequacy in the approach that you're bringing to bear
yeah,
on this scripture. But unless there's something about the approach the angel is recommending where you really should either have figured out the reasonableness of it on your own, or you should see, once the angel explains it to you, why it just inevitably makes the most sense. It's not correct for the angel to say that it isn't actually contradictory, because it wouldn't actually be like any way. So like this notion of some kind of master hermeneutic, like the thing is, it does exist. And inspiration has a meaning where it's like it's the scripture is going to speak to you and give you a kind of, if you will, authorized message. It's going to be the right thing that you needed to perceive at the right situation that you were in your life. So like as Luke would say, is he quoting somebody else? Yeah, he's quoting Jed. I don't think you guys met Jed. It's not objective. it's personal. That doesn't mean anything goes, but it is personal. So the truth of Scripture is something which is, its meaning is tethered to the events, of your life and the situation that you find yourself in. So that is the sense in which it's inspired, because it's like only through those words, in an almost kind of lectio divina kind of way, does God's truth get to you. I mean, it can reach you in other ways, but it's like in our time, this is the place that you go to listen to whatever God has to say to you. I mean, if only because this is the place that it's collectively understood, that is collectively understood to be the place where everyone should go to listen, for the message, or messages of God. So, and like because the hermeneutic is God's love, and so, in other words, there's going to be some interpretation that is the most appropriate based on love, which is it's just something like, what is the most sort of person affirming reading that is possible, in the way that Jordan Peterson talks about embedded timeframes, and networks of relationships. So not only for you and not only now, but also tomorrow, and not only for you, but for your family, and not only for your family in the here and now, but also, for your community, over longer and longer periods of time, over wider and wider networks of people. There's and yeah, I mean, the system under consideration is potentially infinite, but at the same time, determinate meanings are closed down on and decisions are taken. So there is going to be a sort of, for lack of a better phrase, an optimal decision that you take here and now, that's based on, weighing everything in the balance, and loving God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and loving your neighbor as yourself. And like the correct interpretation of Scripture will be what helps you see that sort of at higher levels of reality. Whatever whatever understanding you have to form at that higher level in order to kind of, I don't know, terminalize that operation, and really realize it down to the smallest detail in concrete reality. It's going to be like the floating abstract part of that expression.
What it sounds like you're getting at, well, you said earlier that you have to bring something to bear on this text, because you said it doesn't seem like something leaps out at you to say, interpret me this way. What you just described sounds like something approaching that. You say, if love is your highest guiding principle, then your interpretation should conform to that. So is that what you were getting at, or am I misreading that?
No, that is, and people will ask you, what's love though? It's like, fair question. I look at it as, when you see someone as an end in himself or herself, and basically someone, I don't know, someone whom it pleases you to please. But how do you please them? You have to know everything about them. And how do you do the most loving thing for someone? It's not a question separate from how absolutely everything else in reality is.
Mhm.
You have to, if you could, you would take everything into account.
Yeah.
And also the thing is, and now it's going to be hard for me to explain this time of day, but as something of a, oh man, I want to say I'm a panentheist. And so I'm comfortable with saying that God is that everything in a certain sense, but people will ask you to define panentheism, and it's like, yeah, fair enough. Because the philosopher Ryan Mullins had a whole paper on how people who claim to be panentheists will claim as theological distinctives certain beliefs that classical theists affirm and that pantheists affirm, and so there's not really any kind of clear set of theological distinctives that marks the position that various philosophers or theologians have advocated as panentheism. And I almost, because God is held, in the tradition and in Scripture, rightly understood. Am I even able to make that claim? But because everyone seems to want a God who is both immanent and transcendent, panentheism is what it is. But I think that in terms of saying what panentheism is not as easy as pointing to somebody's like off the shelf like definition of it or some thinker's belief system. Panentheism exists, but only like as the limit of theological accuracy, which is like also identified with God himself. Which is, again, like that's also related to the apokatastasis. There's just a way that we're got.
I gotta Google that word.
Oh,
what does that word mean?
That's the if you're a universalist, you believe in the restoration, not only of every human being, but of all creation.
So it says the doctrine of final restoration of all sinful beings to God in the state of blessedness. Compare
Right.
universalism. Okay.
But see, for me, like there's a way that it's like if we live and move and have our being in the consciousness of God, consciousness has this way of being separate from its contents on one level, but also identified with them on another level. Basically, it seems to me that there is always a sense in which God is identified with the contents, that in which God is identified with his creation, understood as something like the contents of his consciousness. Now, a lot of people are just uncomfortable with speaking of God as having a consciousness at all. And, that's the harder kind of metaphysics that I can really only do in, the morning. And that's why I spent so much time talking about stuff on my podcast. Like I have like over 75 episodes, and a lot of them are about stuff like this, but because I want to be able to show people that it's reasonable to believe something like what I believe, but ultimately I'm increasingly coming to see that as a misguided impulse. But
I gotta ask you a question. You said something I wanted. It landed on my map, and I want to correct me if it didn't land the right way. I think this is some common ground between us. I forget your language here, but it sounded like what you were saying was that because you have to, if you're going to make any kind of statement about what the ultimate selective principle is, whatever, let's say God is, if you're going to make a statement about whatever this thing is that's infinite, when you particularize it, you have something like it sounded like you were alluding to the fact that if you're going to try to capture this thing, you're going to have something specific like Christianity. You're going to have a theism is this landing anywhere on your map, or is that what you were getting at, or am I off?
The thing is, there are some things that, how would I describe this? Imagine some kind of something which by definition does not exist in the perceptual world. It's too abstract to be, man, I don't even want to talk about this if I'm going to misspeak about it, because I know I see, the thing is, I know I said it properly, at other times. It's a function that you can know by the values that it gives you. And
I know what you mean.
it's technically infinite. You're never going to have all of its values, but it's kind of like the more values that you have, the more that you can guess at what it is that's
you're sampling it.
Yeah.
Is it, just to make sure I'm keeping up, is this kind of what we were talking about the other night, Craig, when we were talking about when we brought up the example of the baby experience?
Well, totally. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
That's what it seems to me like. That's the way I would say it. But I
Yeah.
don't know if I'm only partially
like an infinite.
hearing Cal, what you want me to hear. The way I would say what I'm trying to get at is that you have this kind of the Tao. You have this thing that is unspecified. It's the function that you can sample, but you can't, to make any description of it is a reduction. And so you have this, I'll put it this way, Jason and I talked about babies, because when you're born, you have almost no knowledge structures constructed at all. And so what you see when you look at the world, you don't know any, you need to construe the world as an arena, right? You say there's a game to play and I need to know the rules. So if I was to, in my house here, this is the turning the doorknob game to pass through the house. So there's like all these, because I have objectives, I see the world as an arena or a set of infinite arenas. Right. So you have these arenas and rule sets, but if you're a child, if you're a baby, you have nothing. So you see the world and you look out at the world and you're totally blind, and you're not just blind, you're violently blind, and it's not because you can't see, it's because you don't know what not to see. Right. And so there's these kind of knowledge structures that we build. We're kind of acquiring information about arenas and the rule sets of those arenas. And the outermost rule set, let's say, that's a religious question. We want to know what's the outermost rule set that contains all the other games. It's a Jean Piaget idea. And it sounded like but to make a statement about that blindness, though, that what you're seeing when you're seeing everything, when you have no rule sets, you could call that, I don't want to call it God because it's misleading, but it
is God. I mean, in one sense. And one thing that I've really been at pains, and this is the thing that it's just like, I feel like I've explained it so many times, and I know that no one has been listening like any of the times that I've tried to explain it. And I can explain it well, and I can explain it poorly. And the weird thing is, no matter how many times I explain it, I don't explain it well. It's not, there's no guarantee that I will explain it well, kind of like Tiger Woods. Like, he's if you give him kind of an easy putt, it's a very high probability, but it's not 100% that he'll do it. Even Tiger Woods can still mess up. Not that I'm Tiger Woods, but so the thing is, we've always been tempted, you can see it in many forms, theologically. Extreme apophatic or negative theology makes God into nothingness. And it's almost hard to distinguish God from nothing or nothingness itself, because it's so absolutely absolute and infinitely infinite. So what I was telling you, Jason, the other night, I said it's both X and not X, and neither X nor not X, and I stopped myself from elaborating on it. But basically, if you have like a, I'm going to use the word plenum. That's not even the right word. I don't even know the right term. In Venn diagrams, they have all the terms that you need. It's not a very complicated, really, idea. You have all these descriptors or predicates that you can put on a thing.
Yes.
It's a lamp, it's a pizza, it's a Craig, it's a Jason, it's a dog, it's a bird.
Yes.
And to assert, to predicate any of these things onto a thing, onto something, is to say that it's not everything else.
Yes.
Or any of the other things.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the meaning. So the negation of some term is its complement. It's everything that it isn't. And if you put what it is and what it isn't together, you have the infinite, which is the undifferentiated.
You have the, when you put the, you said when you put the X and the Y together, you have the Z. What would you say that sentence again?
If you have, so like there's, you have your set of
Mhm.
everything that something can be.
Mm-hmm.
And what it means for it to be one of these terms is for it to not be all the other terms.
Yeah.
Or any of the other terms. Any slash all.
I think
And
I've heard
if
you say this before.
And if you take all the terms together, the whole thing, that is like the infinite.
Mhm.
And so in other words, if you say something that, if you say that something is all of these things at once, what you end up with is the same as if you said it was absolutely none of these things.
Mhm.
You end up with something that doesn't compute.
Yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
So it's the same kind of non-computation, whether you take all of it or none of it. So there's a way that nothingness is the same as everythingness. This is what Spinoza meant when he, in a principle that he attributed, no, excuse me, this is what Hegel meant in a principle that he attributed to Spinoza, that every determination is a negation and vice versa. So what it follows is that both X and not X is actually the same as neither X nor not X, because it's the same thing. It's the absolute, the unlimited, and it's also the idea of contradiction. But you need that idea in order to have a concept of logic. Logic doesn't have any meaning without reference to contradiction. Logic is the art of reasoning while avoiding contradiction. They're interdefined. Contradiction also needs sort of, in a sense, it needs the idea of logic to be made sense of, in a sense. But in another sense, it's like once you've already set it alongside logic, it's no longer what it truly is, truly undefined and unreferenceable,
Yes.
if that's the word.
It's unreferenceable. Yes.
In other words, if you have the infinite, the conceptual infinite that's juxtaposed to the finite, that is not really any, that's not really infinite anymore. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. But so the thing is, that nameless nothing, true nothing that I'm not even referring to when I'm referring to it, kind of thing,
I know what you mean.
that is God. But that's not all there is to, how to put it. Something is only really infinite if it's also finite. And so the thing is, I would say that's God, but I haven't even exhausted God. And so,
Well,
saying, because the thing is, there is also, on my view, and this is what, so I talk about an aspect of the Godhead, a person of the Godhead, that is it is actually finite, potentially infinite, but not finite in reference to something external to it. So it's actually more like self-defined. But and really in all this, I was influenced by Christopher Langan, and influence is almost too that's too generous a term to me, because I wasn't thinking anywhere, I wasn't thinking along these lines at all before I really kind of got into his work, and he's the one who knows the most about it. But you've got a self-defined ultimate reality that is this kind of self-resolving paradox, that it is a kind of reflexive dialectic. It's just always engaged in this process of attempting to know the infinite with reference to the finite, and thereby presupposing underneath a truer, deeper infinite which it has yet to know. Okay.
Well, yet to
And-
know, right.
And so the thing is, if you have, theoretically, you would say, like, whatever is binding the infinite and the finite is also infinite. And so you've got something like a Father, a Son, and then a Holy Spirit there. And so in the sense of like that really absolute ground of being, it's been called, you can say you have the Father. But it's not right to attribute these kinds of intentional attitudes to that, the way that we want to of God. To say that God loves you, to say that God is a loving mind when he's also the being of things that are not love and are not minds, it seems like a kind of category error, because what God is there is so generic that it is just like pure undifferentiated being, which is again the same as nothingness.
Well, it's unlabeled, but it doesn't mean.
Well, nothingness would be, see, pure being would be both pizza and not pizza. Okay.
But it's not. Go on.
And nothingness is neither pizza nor not pizza, but they're actually the same thing. They're both expressions of something absolute that cannot be conceived of, referred to, because it's not bound. It's not limited in any way. So, and so that is God in one sense, but that's not like the only sense. Because there's also a sense in which God is an intentional mind, but I kind of like panpsychically assume that all of reality is conscious on some level, and there's a level of reality where everything is conscious, like as everything. And you could, is that identifying God with the universe? Kind of, but it's like what Chris Langan said that was super deep was like, God is this kind of Russellian like set of all sets, where he, in order to be what he is, he also includes himself, which incidentally makes him both immanent and transcendent.
But it's the thing that keeps catching me is we're using the set theory idiom to describe something that contains it, right? It's the set theory is a game that's nested.
Yeah, in conventional set theory, you absolutely cannot have a set of all sets that contains itself.
Right, but I mean,
that literally leads
but it's
provably to
problematic.
contradiction. That's why in his introduction to the CTMU, Chris Langan does something different. He defines two sets of containment, which very broadly, one of them has to do with, you might say, geometry, the other algebra, or it has to do with, the former has to do with space, the latter has to do with time. The former has to do with state, the latter has to do with syntax, instance and pattern, or really the defined and the undefined. He defines two senses of containment, and speaks of some notional set of all sets which contains itself in one sense of containment, the topological, but which is contained by its power set. It contains its power set in the topological sense, or sense A, but is contained by its power set in the descriptive sense, or sense B. It doesn't matter what you call them. The idea is, if you have two senses of containment, then theoretically, at least, there's a way around this. But it had more to do with understanding a sort of deep, what's the word I want? He calls them dualisms, symmetries. In some notional ultimate reality, there's going to have to be a deep symmetry that exists between like the time-like dimension of its existence and the space-like dimension of its existence.
I don't know how, I don't know how you can say that, because I don't know how we can use these, we're using the language of set theory, and we're using language to describe this thing that to try to use, how do I say it? I have to just retreat to this language of games and rule sets. Like we're using a rule set, an inner rule set, to talk about an outer rule set. There's something just.
Are you using,
we're
so
gonna
Craig,
fail.
are you saying the rule set we're using to even approach this is like the rule set of language? Is that what you're saying? Or what do
Not
you
the rule
mean?
set of, not the rule set of language, but I'm saying we're gonna fail to capture this thing. That language just is going to, not just language itself, language is going to fail to make contact with this, you call it the ground of being, but also set theory is going to fail to make contact with this.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is it will and it won't. So like, because on one level, the Tao that cannot be, that can be named is not the Tao. So what, book over? Like, I can't refer to, if I'm not referring to nothingness when I refer to it, then what am I referring to? Am I wasting everybody's time? Looking at it another way, we might, you know, Russell, his whole approach to set theory foundered when he was only approaching things on some kind of first order level of reference. But you know, the problems went away when you're allowed. Same thing with the incompleteness theorem. The problems go away if you're allowed to go up to another level of abstraction or predication or reference. So in other words, if you say something is totally illimitable, that itself is a limit, obviously. But it's also a limit at a different order of reference. It's something like a second order limit, that on the first order level of predication, there can be no limits. So in other words, it's not a broken logic, but only because it's just infinitely recursive. And that's what it has to be.
Right, but so what we've done though is we're aware of the fact that when we're having a religious discussion, we're trying to make statements about this unknowable something. We're trying to make an outermost description of reality. That, you see what I'm getting at? And so it seems problematic to me.
It can't be outermost in some absolute sense, like there was some kind of absolute backdrop that, you know, just kind of existed on its own, you know, without any need for, you know, like proof or derivation. What reality has to be ultimately is something that can only give itself in terms of itself. It's something that's self-defining, self-writing. And again, that self prefix is a key to the reflexive nature of it. If what you were talking about wasn't what you were talking about, then it wouldn't be what you were talking about. And there truly would be no purpose. And also on some level, it's like reality wouldn't even be able to process itself. Although, you know, there just gets into some strangeness where one tries to imagine the nothing that would exist in place of reality, but one cannot, because there can't be, you know, any nothing in place of something. And the really tricky thing about this is that, see, all this stuff is stuff I've said much better elsewhere at other times, but the really interesting thing is like what is kind of a union of both, um, if you will, what is and what isn't, or the defined and the undefined, or something and nothing, somethingness and nothingness. It's not, it's not really absent from nothingness, but like the nothingness is not absent from what is bound and defined and limited. They exist together. For one to exist, if you had pure beingness with no nothingness, that would as much be nothingness as if you just had nothingness and no like beingness or whatever. But neither of those is possible. Like, what if they existed necessarily, they would be here, but they don't. So but they aren't, so they don't. And if you only have two choices, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh my
They
goodness.
do it as they do in a certain sense, because if you're an infant, that's what you do experience. You experience, if you have no knowledge structures whatsoever, there's a tsunami of sense information.
It doesn't actually exist. So because it's like to say that all the stuff that it could be is actually there, is to say that the infinity is like actualized, which is to speak of like an infinity in its totality, which is like not possible. So like a potential infinite is like an infinity over time. Potential infinity is like infinity over time, but actual infinity is like infinity over space. And whatever's in space, like as an object in space, as a thing in space, is defined, but the infinite is never defined. It's not defined as X or not X, it's both.
I don't think I understand your objection.
Yeah. Well, it's hard for people to understand what's wrong with an actual infinity.
Yeah, I'm struggling to keep up both of you guys.
Yeah, like I know I went back and forth with my brother on this a lot because he thinks that, yeah, of course you can just have like all of infinity right there. It's like, no, you can't ever have all of infinity ever. Like you can't ever exhaust infinity. But to speak of an actual infinity would be to exhaust it. Now that's the intuition that people need help reaching. And so, they have like the Hilbert Hotel paradox. The Kalam cosmological argument tries to get there when it talks about like, well, look, if the past was actually infinite, then it wouldn't be open, like it would never have ended. We would never have gotten to now. So now wouldn't be able to exist. Where the past is understood, in contradistinction to now, where we begin with the assumption that we're at some point in time that is not the past. If the past were infinite, we could never be here. Assuming some kind of like a theory of time where it's understood where time actually flows and it's not static and something that exists all at once.
It feels like we're doing it. We're just kind of we're doing a language thing here where we say the rules of the definition of this word, the definition of our terms make it impossible that time could be infinite, right?
Like my friend Michael was like, hey, this is just word games at the end of the day. And what I should have told him in that exchange was, 2 + 2 is 4 is a word game.
Well, we're making an assumption that language, my assumption is it's provisional. It's not as if just because the rules of language say it's so, mean that reality itself is so.
Right. So you have the possibility of the absolutely noumenal thing that has no contact with cognition, right? It's real, but when we say that it is real and it exists, we don't mean that it's anything you can touch, smell, hear, or see, nor is it anything which is spatio-temporally interwoven as a cause or an effect of, perceptually observable things, because time and space are also modes of cognition. So when I say that something exists, ordinarily I mean it's something perceptual or it's something causally interwoven with perceptual things, even if I can't experience it directly. But with this thing that I say exists, I don't mean any of that. When I say this noumenal thing exists, I don't mean anything perceptual or causal, but then what do I mean? And I don't know what it means. Like, if we're just asserting it exists, surely we have to mean something. Because there could be something that I was just between there could be something that exists on the other side of an absolute disjunction or gap. We're
see
on
what
the
you're
other
getting
side
at.
of which cognition is there.
Mhm.
And so it exists on the other side of it, right? And it's ultimately the paradox that is getting at is you're saying it's like an unrelated relationship. It is a kind of contradiction in terms. But so I'm asserting it exists, but because I'm saying there could be something like this, it could exist,
Mhm.
but I don't know what it means to say that it exists.
I see
In
what
other
you're
words,
getting at.
I literally just don't even know what that expression means in that expression. And it actually cannot be distinguished from nothingness itself. And
Let me ask you a question. I
there
think
is
maybe
all,
it'll help us
yeah, okay.
get our wheels back on the rails here, because so if we're going to make, tell me if you guys agree with this. If we're going to make a truth claim, it seems to me like we need to say that this is kind of an absolute type of truth claim that stands independently of our experience. Let's say if there was, it would be true whether or not there was anyone there to comment on it or for us to see it. It's
No,
an absolute.
I think it has to be perspectival. I think it
Okay.
has to be, yeah.
Okay,
Because
so
otherwise it's the noumenal thing that is just exists somehow in a completely non-perspectival way.
yes, so I think we agree about that. Well,
Yeah.
I wonder if you guys agree. It seems to me most Christian people would say that the claims of the Bible are not perspectival; they're
Correct.
absolute truth claims.
Correct.
Where, yes,
I
and
don't really happen to agree with that.
I'm in the same boat with you. Go ahead, Jason. You look
Well, I don't even know if I'm tracking. That's why, like, I really want to, like you said, get the wheels back on here. So, so in regards to absolute truth claim, you're saying that it has to line up with our perception, our reality, things we actually experience. Is that what you're saying? Rather than just saying it's some truth out here, and whether it lines up with your experience or not, it's still true. Is that what you're?
I
Is that
can
what we're
answer for
talking about?
myself. I can answer only for myself, but it sounds, the way I'd put it is that it's not about aligning, it's not about your claims aligning with your experience, but
Yeah.
it's about whenever we're going to talk about our definition, let's say, of truth,
Okay.
you
Yeah.
have to ground it in something. You have to say either when we say something's true, that's grounded in some kind of like absolute God-given type of truth. Like it's just the way it is because God says so. It's like a ground. You have to say it's just true in an objective kind of way, is maybe the word I should use. It's objectively true. Or you have to say something like it's true in a Darwinian sense or a perspectival sense. Like we can't really make contact if there's some kind of objective truth. We can't really make contact with that because we are limited by, we're creatures with sense organs, and the truest that something can be true is and that it corresponds to, there's different ways of kind of sorting it out, but it's like, is there an objective truth or is there only,
I think I'm kind of catching up here. So you can't actually say, to say it's objectively true, you're already kind of pulling it into the, is that what we're saying? Like, because we are so finite, you can't actually make that claim or something? Is that, I feel like I'm way off base here, sorry. I feel like I'm kind of tracking, but my language is not even, keep going, don't let me interrupt, just keep going.
well, Cal,
I'll
I'm
catch
curious,
up.
I'm curious, Cal, what you think of this, because it seems like we're in a relative minority, at least on this call, because I think that's an uncommon view among Christian people.
Well, again, it's just another way of saying what my friend said, quoting my other friend. It is not objective, it is personal, but that doesn't mean that anything goes. So he distinguishes, he doesn't really like the objective subjective dichotomy, and says that it's personal, but it's not arbitrary. That's what
Totally.
he said.
It's not arbitrary.
And so that's the nature of reality, where like where the perceiver and mind and cognition are an integral part. It's a self-understanding mind ultimately, and God is the answer that we give to the question of whose mind. I'm quoting Chris Langan again. I want to read something by him. It's going to sound maybe a little bit strange, and also I want to say, why shouldn't you believe in an actual infinity? Because I would say this is the best intuition I can give right now, that something to be actual is that has to do with space. To exist spatially is to exist all at once. To exist actually is to exist all at once, but infinity never exists all at once.
I agree with you there too. I think
But-
we're on the same page.
Maybe I'm
Sorry,
just
go ahead.
confused on a language hiccup or something, because is this kind of getting at what when we first talked about a closed system? Like you're saying to define an actual infinity is to kind of close the system or something?
I want to talk about that system and how it's not closed, but it's not without definition either. It's some kind of like open-ended self-writing system.
Yeah, because
Langan
when
again calls it, go ahead.
because when I hear the word infinity, I don't think of anything closed. I almost think of something I would maybe say more like endless wonder or something, like just
Yeah.
it's I don't think of it in a space term or even a time sense. I don't think.
So just listen to this and just how
Okay.
good it is, really. So this is Chris Langan's counter objection to the objection that Gödel's incompleteness theorem disproves his kind of his theory of everything, which is called the CTMU. So here he's kind of stating the objection. And maybe should I share my screen, or does it not
Sure.
Yeah,
matter?
you should be able to. I think I changed it.
Oh man. Oh yeah, here we go. Oh, it's relatively easy to do.
I hope this hasn't been frustrating for you, Kyle. I'm trying to keep up.
No, it's not. I'm just amazed you guys are giving me the time of day. Most people don't when I get down this rabbit hole.
Oh no.
In order to be consistent, mathematics must possess a kind of algebraic closure. And I know it's going to be a lot of jargon and stuff, but just kind of feel what he's saying.
I want to
Yeah.
set up like in 5 seconds. Jason, we had a conversation about this in the past based on Veritasium's video about this Gödel's incompleteness.
Yeah, I
completeness theorem.
remember.
And
Yeah.
there's the people who thought that infinity, it was the people who liked the set theory and infinity and the people who didn't. And this is exactly related to that conversation that we had.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in order to be consistent, mathematics must possess a kind of algebraic closure, and to this extent must be globally self-referential. Concisely, closure equals self-containment with respect to a relation or predicate, and this equates to self-reference. For example, the self-consistency of a system ultimately equates to the closure of that system with respect to consistency, and this describes a scenario in which every part of the system refers consistently to other parts of the system. Oh goodness, is this even okay? I'll start here. This is better. To demonstrate the existence of undecidability, Gödel used a simple trick called self-reference. Consider the statement, this statement is false. It is easy to dress this statement up as a logical formula. Aside from being true or false, what else could such a formula say about itself? Could it pronounce itself, say, unprovable? Let's try it. This formula is unprovable. If the given formula is in fact unprovable, then it is true and therefore a theorem. Unfortunately, the axiomatic method cannot recognize it as such without a proof. On the other hand, suppose it is provable, then it is self-apparently false because its provability belies what it says of itself, and yet true because provable without respect to content. It seems that we still have the makings of a paradox, a statement that is unprovably provable and therefore absurd. What if we now introduce a distinction between levels of proof? So this is again like talking about levels of language, orders of reference, calling one level the basic or language level and the other higher level, the meta language level. Then we would have either a statement that can be metalinguistically proven to be linguistically unprovable and thus recognizable as a theorem, conveying valuable information about the limitations of the basic language, or a statement that cannot be metalinguistically proven to be linguistically unprovable, which, though uninformative, is at least not a paradox. Presto, self-reference without the possibility of paradox. So he's claiming that basically the incompleteness theorem is not a problem if you allow your language to kind of take itself as an argument and ascend to higher levels of reference where it can talk about itself. Such paradoxes are properly viewed not as static objects, but as dynamic alternations associated with a metalinguistic stratification that is constructively open-ended, but transfinitely closed. Note that this is also how we view the universe. Otherwise, the paradox corrupts the informational boundary between true and false, and thus between all logical predicates and their negations, which of course destroys all possibility of not only its cognitive resolution, but cognition and perception themselves. Yet cognition and perception exist, implying that nature contrives to resolve such paradoxes wherever they might occur. In fact, the value of such a paradox is that it demonstrates the fundamental necessity for reality to incorporate a ubiquitous relativization mechanism. So it's like the only thing that's absolute is everything is relative kind of thing. For its resolution, namely the aforementioned metalinguistic stratification of levels of reference, including levels of self-reference, that is cognition. He's claiming cognition is intrinsically self-referential. I mean, and he's right, but also just reality, anything is intrinsically self-referential, which is a little harder to see. A paradox whose definition seems to preclude the stratification is merely a self-annihilating construct that violates the syntax, structural, and inferential rules of reality, and therefore lacks a real model. So whatever has like no model and cannot be cognized is like that noumenal thing. It's the inconceivable concept, which exists in relationship to reality in a kind of unrelated relationship, again, a contradiction of terms. In other words, to describe reality as cognitive, we must stratify cognition and organize the resulting levels of self-reference in a self-contained mathematical structure called self-configuring, self-processing language, which consists of a monic recursive melding of information and cognition called infocognition, incorporates a metalogical axiom or multiplex unity. So that's again his idea that there's no absolute disjunctions. Any differentiation exists in an underlying unity. That's what he calls multiplex unity.
Would you say that sentence again?
For him, there are no absolute disjunctions. There are no unrelated relationships. Any difference exists within an underlying sameness. And reality has to take on that structure. But the thing is, reality is always, so it's like infinite, finite, infinite again. And then what it does is it takes that bottom unity and it pulls it up and makes it an argument of the function. Oh man, what am I going to say? So it's like
recursion, yeah.
Yeah, it is exactly. So you have infinity, finitude, and then like the true infinity that it understands is actually implicitly underneath the infinity and the finitude that it's consciously recognizing. So once it recognizes that, Hegel said, to know a limit as a limit is to be beyond the limit. Once it recognizes that, it sort of, if you will, it makes what was infinite the new finite, and it grabs that underlying infinity and makes it the new infinite. But then it's just doing this to itself.
Yes, it's alternating.
Oh my goodness! Finally, feel like I'm catching up.
Right.
Right.
That's a dialectal evolution thing.
Yeah.
Which language also describes as a process of self-identification, which is super interesting. Because that's what we do. It's like we are always seeking our own sort of highest conception of the infinite. Mm-hmm. Whatever appeals to us is actually like our highest conception of the infinite.
Yes.
And we kind of identify ourselves with that, but only at that level of our identity with where like our self converges with our world, which is, in other words, God.
Yeah.
So it's self-identification and seeing yourself in it, but it's also seeking God as like the limit of oneself through all the possible transformations or operations that can be performed on yourself.
Yes.
But not that you ever attain godhood. And not that God isn't an intentional like mind that does love you, and not that he isn't merely a metaphor.
You're saying,
but
you're saying, tell me if I'm hearing you correctly. You're saying that here's this infinite thing. What were we calling it? It's the thing without a model. It's the infinite, and all the finite stuff is nested in it, right? And you're
Mhm.
saying we are speaking as if we are outside of it, right? So there's three layers here. You have the outer, it's not outermost, but it's the finite layer, and then there's the infinite, and then there's a finite again. And we're speaking as if we're both simultaneously like looking outer and looking. When we talk about the infinite, we're talking about the layer that's above us and the layer that's nested as well. Is that what you mean?
Langen calls it a self-configuring, self-processing language. It's like a reflexive language. And it's also, what's the other thing I was going to say? It's a self-resolving paradox. That's his other description of it. Like, or like in Hegel called it, the identity of identity and difference, which is saying, again, it's another way of saying what I said earlier, which is like, if you have
You're talking about predication.
identity as such, to know it as identity, you know it in contradistinction to difference. But then in juxtaposing these two things, you are positing implicitly an underlying deeper identity, the identity of identity and difference. And
Yes.
his reality as a dialectal evolution, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, over and over and over again, where the antithesis becomes a new thesis and begets a new antithesis, and is, the synthesis underlying it becomes explicit kind of thing. Or again, what I was talking about with the predicates and their complements.
Yes.
You have what is found and defined in distinction to what it isn't, the other, the complement. And then you have some kind of unity that emerges from consciously distinguishing those two things. And then the dialectic continues. That's what reality itself is. It's like
Can I just
yeah.
but maybe put this kind of a personal pin for myself, and you can tell me if I'm getting off base, because I want to just make sure I'm tracking and put it, I guess, in a language that will be more accessible to me in case I forget these things. So like the finite, everything we know is finite. Our world, our existence is only in relation to what we conceive as infinite. But then the infinite is still almost finite to another infinite or something. So it seems to be like a process or a pattern. Is that what you guys are talking about when it's like I can't remember the right word you use. Is that am I getting this right? Am I tracking right? That you're saying I'm sorry if I'm backtracking. There's an infinite,
And the
or what
thing
we
is, it's a
perceive.
thing that you can always describe it more and more accurately, but we all kind of know it it's like we all kind of know what it is we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And you
But
can describe it more and more accurately. Like this dude is going off into like alien levels of
like
There,
so to even attempt, I'm trying to. So like I just want to make sure I'm tracking right. Like sorry, go ahead, Craig. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no,
Go
you
ahead.
go. You
I
were
think if
talking.
you think you're tracking, you probably are tracking.
Okay, because I feel like I feel like we've talked about, or at least attempted to talk about something similar to this idea before, and we were saying, and I feel like it was when we were kind of trying to discuss fantasies, and we were talking about art even, and that we're pulling the girl in the marble in Fantasties. Have you read this book, Cal, by George MacDonald?
No, but it's like art is very much like this because what is beautiful in art is something like your own highest understanding of the infinite,
Yeah,
which
and
is
you pull
also
it.
something like your own highest understanding of yourself, but where the self is convergent in meaning with like its world.
Yeah.
Where the self
So
meets its world.
So I think when we were trying, when this is the way it's just like, so there's this infinite realm, and he has this image of this woman, so the artist would have an image of a woman from this infinite potential realm or something, and then it comes into this finite world, and it's in a sculpture of a marble, and then after it's there's this part of us that wants it to be more infinite, and like now we want the the Marvel woman to become alive. And so we wanted to have breath. And so we wanted to like get back out of this finite and go into another infinite or something. Be an infinite that was even
Yeah,
more
yeah, yeah.
than the
And
infinite it
whatever is
originally was in.
beautiful, that's right.
Okay.
And whatever is beautiful is like sort of, man, I'll read some stuff if you guys are fine with it. Because again, I wrote it down and I said it already better than I could say it if I were to try to improvise it.
Bring it on.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Man, where is it? Is it 46? Calvin wrote the Institutes of Christian Universalism, and I wrote somewhat ridiculously I call my notes the Winstitutes of what exactly I don't know. I didn't specify. They're just the Winstitutes, and each chapter is a Thinstitute. So this is Thinstitutes 46. So I said within each person is that's okay. Just excuse my weird language because it's just I'm just going to read it as it is. Within each person is that soul that knows itself to be infinite. Its representation of itself is its own highest representation of the infinite. That self-image, open parent, but of self where it converges with its world, that is God. That self-image is what it seeks in every movement, what it chooses in every choice. Movement is self-identification. But it's also a religious experience. It's like, people when they're really having a good time, they say, I'm feeling myself, or like it's to choose or desire something in the sense to see oneself in it. But in its higher modes, it's like a religious experience in seeing God, because God is kind of like that point where the self becomes convergent with its world, which always makes me think of whatever Wittgenstein meant when he said the limits of my language are the limits of my world. Which is also sort of not wholly true. Like you can know the limit to know the limit as a limit is to be beyond the limit. Again, Hegel. And I also just said that whether something's in that image or not is a matter of degree to some extent. So every good thing is represented or experienced as the transcendence of some limit, an instance of the unlimited. So whatever stands out to you as good or beautiful does so in virtue of transcending some like heretofore acknowledged limit. That's like phenomenologically, that's its content. It's experienced as like breaking some limit, like a woman who is flawless, like, and who just redefines that term or something. And to that extent, every good thing is experienced as being in the image. Okay, I'm just talking about this hypothetical image, which is like the self's highest representation of the infinite. Okay, and then I wrote some stuff which I don't know if I should read or not. I just wrote this stuff, and I don't even necessarily know if I believe it. I just wrote there is unity with God and there is separateness, a going forth and a return, each time to something higher. You are God and you are not. You are not God and you are. The whole and the part, ever separating and rejoining, yet always united to each other. Inasmuch as this articulates a living contradiction, a limit, I think we can safely say that this is what it is, as safely as we can say the infinite is infinite. We reach the limit and say all there is to say. No, as for me, I think that there is something it is like to be him, capital H. But no one should listen to me. I'm crazy. In other words, I'm saying I think there's something that it's like to be God. God is a consciousness as well as consciousness. It's as well as consciousness itself. He's both set and member. He's an instance of himself. So which means to say that there's a sense in which he's kind of, if not externally defined, a self-defined consciousness that actually has intentional attitudes, and of which we can meaningfully predicate words like love, loving. Okay. And I wrote some other weird stuff I'm not going to read. Of my son, I wrote, in regard to him, I don't know of what limit he represents the overcoming. He is in my image, so I suppose the answer is whatever limit of which I am the overcoming, which is what? Limitation as such, since I am my own world? But he is more my world than I ever was. Um, uh, Langan talks about something called distributed solipsism, the idea that, gosh, whatever is in God or ultimate reality, it's like must experience itself as like the limit of its own world, as a world unto itself, than which, it must, is like than which there is nothing external, which to which there's nothing external. It can't get out of itself.
Mhm.
He has an image. Okay, and this final thing I wrote, which really kind of says it all. He has an image of himself, and this is lowercase h, so I could mean it. I actually meant it of my son. He has an image of himself where his self converges with his world, which is to say, he has an image of God. Put another way, he is an infinite being representing himself to himself as the infinite. Whatever answers, to whatever degree, that image of the infinite is deemed good, sort of how in Genesis, God creates in his image and deems his creation good. This, of course, all has to do with empathy, seeing oneself in the other, or alternately seeing the other as in the image of oneself, and with seeing God in the other, or the other as being in the image of God. This is about movement. This is about love, which is the movement of movement. Okay, that's what I wrote, and I don't know if that necessarily makes any sense, but
It's
I'm
really
trying to get it.
it's totally relevant.
The art and beauty is like seeing your highest conception of the infinite kind of embodied. But then also, like, in that very embodiment, it's like you're already looking for what's beyond it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
At least
Well,
when you get
haven't-
over it.
You haven't touched it. Like you know that it's like you're grazing it, but you haven't made contact.
Yeah. And David Bentley Hart writes very, very well about all this stuff. Kind of like, and Nicholas of Cusa as well. It kind of makes me think of the T.S. Eliot line that we're just rediscovering things that have already really been articulated. But of course, the infinite is never exhausted, right? It's always,
Yes.
we're always driven to we're not re-articulating.
Well, even if it's not, I mean, we had this thing earlier. We're talking about does a true infinity exist? Because even if it's not technically inexhaustible, it's intractable. So I think we agree that there is intractability. That's a kind of infinity, where there can be something
that's right,
there can be
but
something.
the thing is, to even posit it is already to place a limit on it, and it's kind of a thing that it exists in dynamic tension with finitude.
Wait, can you say more about that?
Yeah. If the infinite were just simply infinite, that would be a kind of finitude. For it to be truly infinite, it would have to also be finite. That's like Jordan Peterson was asking, like, that question in the Talmud or something, like, what does God lack? And the answer was limitation, which is like weirdly also hinting at the necessity of an incarnation in order for God to be fully what he is. And it's a self-resolving paradox again. That's what the word I'll use, the phrase I'll use. Interestingly, Langan always brings this up. The thing is, it's fundamentally about time and space, or higher dimensional generalizations of these. And I don't even mean these like in physics terms. I just mean in terms of what you experience as time and space, state and syntax, argument and function, value and variable. And whatever doesn't exist, time is like whatever doesn't exist all at once, at least in terms of your experience of time. So whatever doesn't exist all at once is in some state of undefinition. It's in some state of X and not X. And it's like the function, and the argument of the function is like X or not X. it's like the argument or the value of it's like the argument of the
Saying-
function or the value of the variable. That's
Let
why
me make
Klein
sure I
said to be is to be the value of the bound variable. Anyway, I'm sorry.
I want to make sure I'm in this analogy. You're saying that space is the function, or space is the argument to the function.
Space is the function. Because whatever space, oh, I'm sorry, space is the argument. Time is the function. Because whatever exists in time, our experience of time is that it's not there all at once. Space is what is there all at once, and time is what isn't.
What?
And,
what? One more time.
Okay, that's
the ar-
interesting. I never thought of it like that before.
Say
Okay.
it one more time, just to clear up any ambiguity, because I think I.
So I'm sorry, yeah. So the experience of space is of what is there all at once. Space is like the argument to a function.
The argument, and help me understand.
Or the
in
value
what,
of a variable.
In what sense is it appropriate to say? Why is it appropriate to say that the value of the argument to the function is there all at once?
So if you have a level of specificity where it's either X or not X, that is more specific than the level of genericness that says it allows you to do both X and not X. Okay. So you're asking why is space, or the specific or the defined or the terminal, why is that the argument of a function? It's
Yeah.
less general. Why is it the value of a variable? It's less general. It's less abstract. It's more specific. It's an instance of the pattern. It's not.
So
it's not-
would you extend that to say, well, it's appropriate to say that time is the more abstract of space and time?
Yeah. Yeah.
And why would you say that?
Because time, it encompasses different possible states of space, but they're not all there at once. But it allows for different possible states of space to exist in some kind of sequence along the time-like continuum, but they're not there all at once, because otherwise it would be a contradiction.
Are we
Well, you
to,
could.
to lay this out, to dumb it down for me again? Are we saying I could look out as in space, like I could look at the porch I'm sitting on, and time allows it to be sunrise, or like this
Exactly.
space I'm on? Yeah. Okay.
Sunrise
In the
or a
time,
sunset, and not simultaneously a
and
sunrise
not
and
at the same
sunset, which
time.
is not
Yeah.
a coherent or possible experience.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think that'll be
So-
helpful for people listening as well. Sorry.
When you use the word function and the argument of the function, do you mean it in the algebraic way, or do you mean it in the computer science way?
So that's already the problem. If it's like, well, do you mean it in this way? It's like, I mean it in a way that's so general that I could just as easily have said value and variable. So I'm not meaning it in any specific in the way that you would associate with any specific discipline.
Right, but for it to land on somebody's brain, they have to know what to map it onto. It has to map onto something concrete. Like you can't tell me the abstraction without it. The abstraction
Well,
doesn't make sense.
I can't tell you that car is any Honda. I just can't, because it's
Mhm.
not.
Yes.
So in order for it to land on somebody's brain, that's kind of like what Wittgenstein meant when he said, and this is not at all to be acclaimed, not at all a claim to be smarter than anyone. It is a claim, a true one, to have probably thought about it more than most people have. But you know, Wittgenstein said, like, this book's only going to make sense to people who've already thought the stuff that I'm explaining in this book. So in some sense, it's like the only people who could understand it are the people who don't necessarily need it. To understand, for the concept to land, you have to have more and more analogs to it, because it's a very general kind of relationship. It's the relationship of just relationship. It's pattern and instance.
Okay.
uh, and and so what it really comes, like, the really most fruitful analog to this is like the idea of subdividing the continuum, because there are problems in positing like some kind of infinitely subdivisible continuum, like, because like the way Langen puts it is like, you say it's made of points, and each point is a point of zero extension. So, but the continuum was understood to be extended. It has real extension, like it's 4 feet long or
Well,
something.
this is the reason that I asked if you meant it in the
Yeah.
algebraic sense or the computer science sense, because it has different implications.
Well, would it help to clarify that I don't know either of those senses?
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. So I mean, you meant it in the algebraic. So there's a distinction where if you meet it in the computer science sense, there's an implication that the argument to the function, it's not necessarily.
Whichever one has the more general notion of a function is the one I want.
There. I don't think.
And if
I
there's
don't
some
think I think
understanding of
there-
a function that
I
is
think-
more generic than either, then that's the one I want.
neither of them is more generic. They have different connotations, or they have different implications. They're
So if they
both.
can be held together in contrast, there is some more generic idea of a function. That's the one I want.
I see what you mean, but when you to talk about to talk about subdividing the continuum, that idiom wouldn't occur. That wouldn't be present in the abstraction of the two functions, because subdividing the continuum is
You're
only
saying one
relevant.
of those definitions, only one of those is going to be applicable to some notion of subdividing a continuum, which means that,
Yes.
okay, then it's working better for now, but I would ultimately caution against just equating what I mean with some very specific definition that, because sometimes that's just a source of confusion when people mean something more general. But it's like, because change is a real interesting thing. It's like an ever-present impossibility almost, because it's like you try to pinpoint the moment where change happens, you never can. But yet it does happen. It's like, the reason Langen talks about subdividing a continuum is because there's units of measurement.
It's a degree of freedom, and you're talking about a unit of measurement is it's the whatever ruler you choose. What is of unit length? What's the unit of measurement?
Right, and the problem is that this ruler would itself have to undergo like subdivision. You're going to get into the
yes,
units.
this is the space of all rulers.
You're going to get into the units and blow them up, like on your phone when you're just blowing up the image and then you zoom in again.
Yep.
You're going to do that with the ruler. So
Yes.
that's like that has to do with like the self-definition of reality and the deep relationship between time and space, or higher dimensional generalizations of those concepts, state and syntax, and their interrelationship, which is again like the interplay between the infinite and the finite.
What I'm running into is I'm still not sure why it's appropriate to say that because they're degrees of freedom, space and time. They're just different types of degrees of freedom. So I'm not sure why it's appropriate to think of one as an abstraction that is nested inside of the other.
Or inside of which the other is nested. Because well, when I say space and time, I mean what you experience in your consciousness right now. So if that's different, like if you're thinking specifically of like some kind of, if I say space and time and someone thinks of like an Einstein block, that's already not what I I mean, just what one experiences right now is space and time, where the space that you experience successively, it doesn't exist all at once. The states of space do not exist all at once.
From a,
And so,
in a perspectival sense.
yeah, yes, in a first person sense. And because they can all happen sort of successively, it means that whatever's containing them along that time-like dimension is more abstract. Or
Well, you might just as well say that, well, again, you might just as well say that all time is contained by space.
well, actually, Langdon kind of does say that.
Is that-
The
Sorry, but wouldn't that be what, yeah, like you, sorry, go ahead, because I was gonna agree with you, I think.
that's where it's like you're getting into the what he calls the dualisms or the symmetries.
Yes, I mean, it's a symmetry. Yeah.
And now there was another time where I managed somewhat more successfully to explain it. Where my mind goes in regard to this, because it is actually related, is like what the schoolmen used to debate, where whether the instance or the pattern has primary reality, the particular or the universal. So there was nominalism and there was Platonism. Nominalism said there's only concrete objects, only particulars. And Platonism said, no, the universals are somehow more real than the particulars. If I was to just look at the particulars, excuse me, if I was to say the patterns are something over and above their instantiation, that would kind of be wrong. At least if by that I meant that they're kind of objects that exist in a non-spatial and non-temporal way, because a non-spatial, non-temporal object is like a contradiction in terms. The patterns they're not objects that reside in some kind of Platonic heaven. Truly, as far as if to exist means to exist as an object exists, then yes, only the objects exist. Only the concrete objects do.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, the patterns are nothing over and above instantiation. However, if you have the patterns, or if you have the particulars rather, and you ask if there's anything under and below the patterns that they instantiate, do they have some kind of intrinsic thisness? Just some like kind of like brute concreteness that is not an expression of any pattern? It's like if it did, that property wouldn't be recognizable as any kind of property, because to be recognizable as a property is like to be understood as instantiating various abstract things. And so it's like, in other words, which has primary reality? They're like two cups of water that they flow into each other. And surely the relationship between, so in other words, when you're looking at it the other way, it's like, it's almost like patterns are contained by the instances, not vice versa. And that's kind of right. Like there's a way that you can view time as contained by space rather than vice versa. And that's really kind of the most that I can say about it. Right?
Doesn't it? To me, it's just this, like it's a pattern though, because then time is contained by space, contained by another time, contained by another space, right?
Yeah, it's a fundamentally dynamic relationship.
Okay. Yeah.
The terms in the relationship always change with each revolution of the wheel.
Okay.
Each
Okay.
operation reflects it.
Okay.
But
I'm really trying to, while you guys are talking, I'm trying to think of other ways of, because like I think you mentioned earlier, there's lots of different ways of talking about this, and I was trying to grab at if there's a way to pull it into to make it more accessible for other people. There's a way to pull it into immediate family, because we all are community oriented.
Yeah, for sure.
That thing, that way that everybody experiences, and that's why I was trying to think of, because to part of me, for some reason, I'm thinking, and I could be way off base here, but part of me almost thinks of the difference between masculine and feminine, and what even Jordan Peterson talks about order and chaos. Like the
Yeah, I
order is
think yeah,
order
the
is
feminine
finite.
is like the infinite, and the
Yeah,
masculine is like the finite,
the
the
finite.
order.
Yeah, and then so I'm
Well,
trying to grab and see if I can pull it
so
into a.
yeah, well, that's a great way to go. I'm curious, Cal, would you say, it sounds like this is a discussion about, the discussion you're describing is akin to if we were to have a conversation to say, is masculine, feminine more fundamental, or is order chaos more fundamental? Which is,
No,
which,
that's a great question. What does Pajot say? I don't know this kind of stuff. What does Pajot say?
Oh man, I don't know.
I don't know, but maybe let me massage this a little bit.
Okay, I know what. Okay.
So if you might ask which um, which concept is the emergent one and which is the fundamental one. So for example,
Yes.
were we first aware of the categories of male and female? And an argument for that would be something like, Jason, you and I talked about this with Natalie. As human beings, we're conscious, the first relationship we're aware of is the concrete things we're going to experience is males and females. And so you might say that's more fundamental. And then we didn't have a word for chaos and order, but we probably first had a word for male and female. But you might also say before we were Homo sapiens and we were tadpoles, let's say, you recognize things in the world as that's safe place. That's something that I should go towards because it's shelter. That's something I should go away from because it's a threat. And so you might say that when we learned about male and female, or maybe this is a stupid setup, but which is it's a kind of a chicken egg type of discussion, but it sounds like
So it's like there are things that exist in a relationship to each other, right? Because like one way of looking at it is like looking at from going patterns to instances. The other is like going instances to patterns.
totally.
Like I can go male female to order chaos. I can go order chaos to male female. And it's like what Ian McGilchrist said. I think relationships are more fundamental than relata or related things or relans.
Mhm.
But the thing is, if you say that, that's in a weird way to give an answer that is kind of like it illustrates a kind of performative contradiction, because you have the dyad with the relationship of relationships and relata or relans,
Mhm.
and you said one element in the dyad
Totally.
was more important than the other, whereas really they're a relationship.
Yeah. Well, that's
So-
that's for that. It's like containment isn't really an appropriate to ask questions about which contains which. Containment is the wrong. It doesn't really seem fruitful.
Well, I mean,
What you're asking, which element of the dyad contains the other?
that's right, and the answer is that it's perspectival, right?
Well, they're interpenetrating. They're
Yeah, they're
it's like the predicate and its complement.
And that's very true. I wrote this. This is good because I said time. Okay, I wrote it as a series of quotes, each of which kind of refers to, or in some cases refutes the other. So time is an illusion. Seemingly everyone. The Hindus called the. Maybe I'll share my screen again. Maybe. I'm just doing this because I already said it much better somewhere else. Time is an illusion, seemingly everyone. Hindus called the web of relationships linking all events Indra's net, illustrating the primacy of relationships over relata, Ian McGilchrist. High and low depend on each other, Lao Tzu, or you could have said relationships and relata depend on each other. From Lao Tzu, I think we can see that the truly relationship-oriented response to McGilchrist is that neither relationships nor relata have absolute primacy over each other, because if you have a relatum, there is a relationship. If you have a relationship, there is a relatum. Some people, Ryan Mullins said, some people say time reduces to events, and this is just my remembrance of what he said, it's a paraphrase. Some people say time reduces to events and they're into relationships, but I think time has primacy over events. The reason I say that is when you ask the reductionists to define an event, they suddenly have to make reference to time. say my response here would be that neither time nor events have absolute primacy over each other. Events must be defined with reference to time, but time likewise can only be defined with reference to events. And for me, as an idealist, I do believe that to be is to be perceived. Okay, the ultimate reality in whom we live and move and have our being is a consciousness. And that as a consciousness containing events, it must always have a time-like memory in which those events are linked. But no, really, it's a meta time where it's like, again, it's just different ways of talking about the same thing.
Mhm.
I was just really, I guess, in that, but I didn't really need to pull that up because I think I might have even just said it better the way I said it before I read what I said. Yeah, anyway, I'm
It's
sorry. I'm
just
probably getting
interesting. Well,
way
it's
more
interesting because
technical.
me and Natalie, a long time ago, I mean, not super long ago, at least probably a year ago, we were exploring this idea of where we were trying to see it like conceptualize time as masculine and space as feminine. And I'm
Yeah,
not sure if this
yeah.
seems to like it might kind of map on here a
In
little
one
bit.
sense, yeah, and another no.
Yeah.
In one sense, the
It's
space is
All
masculine
right.
because it's like the known and the actual,
I
and
see.
time is like
Okay.
the potential, and it's the feminine. So in other words, time is the space of space. Hey,
mm,
because so but it's like
Space.
space is the time of time because like you mark the passage of time through like successive states of space.
This is, it seems that I don't know why this came to my head, and it's just, it probably has, I don't want to derail anything here, but this verse, like, I just, when you guys were talking a long time ago, there's this weird verse, and it's in Corinthians. It says, "For as woman came from man, even so man also comes through woman, but all things are from God." And for some reason, like if I'm looking at this
Wow.
masculine and feminine, it seems like it kind of hints at what we're getting at. I've always been curious about that verse because it seems like he's laying out a pattern, kind of like what you're talking about. And I was trying to read it that way as the feminine being infinite. For as infinite comes through the finite, even so the finite also through the infinite, but all things are from God. And I don't know if that's relative or not. It just keeps coming up into my head, and maybe I'm trying to
Wait,
make it
does it originally
really.
say that the finite comes in through the infinite, or
No, no,
just
it says
canon?
that, it says
No, you're
woman and
putting that in, and it totally works, right? And
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's saying man and woman, but
Let
where I
me let
was
me change
masculine.
my son's. I need to change my son's diaper. You gentlemen can just continue. I've been talking too much anyway, so I'm gonna duck out and then come back in if you guys are still here. If not, then good night. But if
Okay,
you're still chatting, I'll join you later
all right,
all
no
right,
problem.
I'll wait.
in a probably about 5 minutes, 10
Cool.
Okay,
minutes.
I bet we'll be here.
all right. Yeah, for sure. I do have to use pee really quick though. Do you care if
All
I
right,
do that?
we'll take an intermission. I'll go grab snacks.
All right. All right. I'm gonna hit pause recording. I think that works. Hopefully it won't do anything stupid. But recording and see. There it goes. Great. We're all back.
You know what was occurring to me is we spent a lot of time talking about this self-reference, the self-referential nature of reality, or what it at least seems to be that way. I've heard people use a different term for this, which is a nice way of talking about it. They'll call it the Escherness of reality, as in MC Escher, as in the infinite staircase, where every upstairs is also downstairs.
I've never heard of
Yeah,
this before.
that beautifully illustrates Heraclitus saying that the way up is the way down, and even the notion of illustration is very well illustrated by Escher with his like self-drawing hands. There's one hand drawing the other
Oh,
hand.
I think I have
Totally.
seen that.
You know,
That's
it's
interesting.
what's crazy is we've come a couple times really dangerously close to a lot of material that Eric Weinstein is very interested in.
Yeah, because he would also have tried to posit a theory of everything, geometric unity.
When you were talking about, Cal, you were talking about space and time, and you talked about making a measurement or choosing, if you're going to subdivide the continuum, you have
Yeah.
to specify. He would
If
call
you
it
if you if you subdivide the continuum, that means that you've got some units of measurement, but if you keep subdividing the continuum, what that means is ultimately the ruler becomes the continuum, and you keep subdividing into the units of measurement, getting ever
Yes.
more fine-grained ones.
And he would say this is his big bet in physics is Einstein says also funny that we talked about a space-time block, but Einstein would say that you have these waves dancing on this space, but there's a metric tensor in relativity where it tells you which ruler to use. What's the unit length, right? But it's not just rulers; it's also protractors as well. You'd say if you have a space, you don't just have to specify a ruler. You have to specify the relationship between 2 degrees of freedom. Like where space, you could say in space-time we have 4 degrees of freedom, right? So you need the rulers and the protractors to make guesses about what happens in that space-time. Let's say, but yeah, like just as you said, he draws attention to the fact that what if the waves, let's say, are dancing not just on the space, let's say dancing across space-time, but dancing also on the space of all possible rulers and protractors that you could have chosen, which is really bizarre and insightful. But
yeah, and it's getting at this kind of idea of whether God can have sort of come into being. Can he have had he can't have had an absolute beginning, because I mean that would be like God. That would be like if he said, first God didn't exist and then he existed. It's like that's an operation, and for it to be real, it has to be real in somebody's mind, I would say, because of the impossibility of defining the totally mind-independent object. You say, like idealism is true, or something like it, because it's saying that idealism says that only mind-independent objects exist. Materialism is going to be something like there are some I'm sorry, idealism is going to say that there's no mind-independent objects. I'm sorry, materialism is going to say there are some mind-independent objects. But if you say a mind-independent object exists, you have to say what you mean by exists, but you can't in the case of a mind-independent object. So I say that in order for God's coming into existence to be real, that operation has to occur in somebody's mind. But the most ultimate mind in which any operation occurs is, by definition, the mind of God. So you can't have God coming into existence, not in some absolute sense, but there's a way that it's like God is his own beginning and his own end, kind of like he's Christ is the Alpha and the Omega. And like the way that the present moment is its own beginning and its own end. Because the eternity is like, it's given to us like in the present. Like it's not really unimaginable to us. It's more like just if you were really in the present and in the zone kind of thing. Because it's like, if you think about it, like the past, it exists in memory, and memory occurs in the present. So in that sense, it's like the present is before the act of remembering, and it's like before the past, and it's also like after the future in some kind of sense. Because however time passes, but you're always in the present. You're never in the future, in a certain way. So like the present is its own kind of self-relativized, like beginning and ending kind of thing, and it's like that is like kind of the microcosm or minimal form of like what reality and what God are. And that consciousness that you have, that it you don't have the experience of having come into being. In a sense, you have no beginning. You're beginningless, but you're only beginningless to yourself. Because your parents, you have a beginning. But God is beginningless, because all consciousness is beginningless to itself. God is beginningless to himself, but outside the mind of God, there is no other mind. So in that sense, he's like truly beginningless. And you're also endless in the sense that you're never going to have in order for you to end, you have to have like to yourself, you have to have the experience of ending, but you can never have that experience. You can't have the experience of going out of existence, because that operation, in order to be real to you, would have to occur in your mind, which wouldn't exist in the case of its going out of existence, kind of thing. I don't know if that's remotely helpful to anyone.
This question really quick. The going out of existence, could we say the only time I could maybe say I've gotten close to that was in surgery? If it seemed like oblivion. Could that be something similar of like, I mean, I personally, I believe there's no going out of existence, because it just seems to me like there's this I can't conceptualize of it. Like we have this eternity built in us or something.
It's the exact same thing as like, if I'm thinking about nothing, is it truly nothing? It's like, not if I can think about it. I'm representing it to myself as a kind of ground thing. That oblivion is like something that you remember.
That's true. Yeah.
It's in your mind, and as some kind of defined reference of your conscious state, or your intentional attitude or whatever. So it's like it's the same thing, kind of. It's always
I see what you mean.
to re-describe the same thing, but you can never exhaust it. You can never, you can come up with so many ways to talk about it, so many examples where it's imaged forth, but it's of course never exhausted. And then the thing is, I guess, if the game that you're playing is like, I want to talk about the infinite in such a way as to show how smart I am and really show off to everyone, well, like that game will get old really fast. You will exhaust, not the infinite, because you can't, but you will exhaust that value, or that value will be exhausted.
Yeah.
But if you're gonna continually subdivide the continuum, but in the service of love, then that would never get stale. That would always remain fresh. And it's kind of like, because like every value that every false god that you serve, it's always going to fail you, and that's why it's hell to serve a false god. And it's always going to quit out on you. But it's like, oh man, this is really weird and kind of difficult idea. But there's the question of whether, see, all those values that land you in hell are like finite values in some sense. Like they're not God, so they're always going to run out at some point. They're always going to leave you high and dry and disappointed. But the question is whether the experience of eternity is ever possible when one does not have like the highest value as one's value. Because traditionally hell is eternal. And you can understand eternity as a kind of mindfulness, where like you're fully in the moment, more so than just like infinite temporality. This happened, and that happened, and that happened. And like that's kind of like what heaven is. It's like you're just so fully like in the moment of rapture or the beatific vision or what have you, that you never look away. And there's nothing to really gauge it against, kind of thing. And then in hell, it's almost the opposite, because it's like every moment is a moment of revulsion and turning away, and the mind trying to like flee the moment that it is in. It's like the complete like absence of mindfulness as much as it's possible. Kind of, I don't know. It's but yeah, it's just see, now the thing is, this is really something that,
sorry, go ahead.
I'm not doing a good, no, I'm not doing a good job explaining it right now.
No, I think I know. I mean, when you were talking about eternity, I think I know what you're getting at. I actually was trying to explain this in a video I recorded earlier by myself, was that I think I perceive like when those words are brought up, I think I tend to perceive them that way now. I don't know that I always did, but like almost like I don't know that I say a mode of being or something, but like eternal life is like something you man, now I don't even know how to describe it. Like you just like
fantasy novel. Oh,
I'm
sorry,
sorry.
go ahead.
No, what were you saying? The fantasy.
I plotted a fantasy novel where the main character is somebody who deliberately chooses to accept his mortality. It's actually weirdly the same thing as the story I told about myself. And it took me a long time to realize that that story was a subconscious projection of everything that was happening in my like inner life, but it really was. But like, it's like in the story, there's a like a mind virus character,
Okay.
and like the protagonist is, his name is Gage. No relation to Gage symmetry or whatever Weinstein talks about. Um, and the character is his what do you call it? You know, his enemy is Siren. Siren has two R's. I think Nabokov used a pen name that was Siren, but with one R. Anyway, it's not supposed to mean anything. It is, but oh man, it's a bad beginning. But so the thing is, this is a kind of, this thing is like a mind virus. It doesn't have any it's not a soul. It's almost like the opposite of a soul, where it cheats death by displacing the life force in someone's body, the soul in someone's body, and then taking up residence within that body. But in so doing, it always loses part of itself.
Mhm.
And so it's always losing the memories that make up the narrative that is itself.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's like a kind of dementia. And the way that Gage explains it to someone who doesn't know what he's hunting is that this thing is not, this thing is not a single person. It's more like a wave. It doesn't have any it's not, there's no continuity really, not ultimately.
Mhm.
And so but the thing is, this thing is the reason it does that is it sacrifices its memories with each jump uh, from body to body, because that's the price of cheating death. But its notion of cheating death is like infinite temporality, kind of.
Mhm.
But Gage, he gives up his mortality because he's fighting for something that is so dear to him that if he can save it, then losing tomorrow means nothing. He's fully satisfied in the present moment in such a way that if there were to be no tomorrow, it wouldn't mean anything to him. So it's like there's two senses of eternity that are competing in that story. And like that's what I said in my story about like how God was telling me that I can't choose him for the sake of heaven or eternal life. I had to willingly sacrifice my own, I had to willingly accept my own mortality before I knew what was truly, before I knew that eternal life was on offer, so that it could be a selfless choice.
Yeah. I track with that mentally. I don't know that the I'm right with you. I feel like majority. I mean, I don't want to make. I feel bad making that claim, but I would think a more. It seems like a majority of Christians don't necessarily have that same
Well,
perception.
I do too. In other words, it consoles me because it makes me that once I die and once my child dies, you know, will still go on. But the real life that God is calling us toward is something which doesn't need that consolation,
Mhm. Yeah.
which would be just as satisfied to, you know, to serve love in the here and now, without any thought of the future, you know, as if, you know, just as if there were some offer of like an infinite future ahead of you, kind of thing. Because I
Yeah.
don't know, like it's
It's
really
a hard.
supposed to be about being in the moment.
Yeah. It's a hard like thing to even bring up. I feel like a lot of times because it's um but I think that is ultimately I don't know, and maybe that's just a personal thing, but I think that is ultimately the more I don't necessarily want to say Christian response, but maybe more loving response, as in accepting that self-sacrificial of even sacrificing your idea of future or of eternity or being willing to and being content with that for the service of others. Yeah. Yeah. Because you're not in it for yourself. You're not in it just to have a cushy, comfy afterlife sort of thing. you're, yeah. And that is a very hard thing to wrestle with, and hard thing to, yeah.
Yeah,
hard-
that's why what's her name? Bethel McGrew was talking with PBK about, like, the importance of apologetics and the comfort that it brings to people, and originally that was why I was doing the kind of apologetics that I was doing, but which again I described in that episode where I tell my life story for 4.5 hours. But the thing is, it is comforting. But the thing is, once you become like a super Christian, you won't need that kind of comfort. And if you could learn to live without the need for that comfort, you would be closer to being a true super Christian than if you were reliant on it. Like if you were just some Buddhist dude who was like, no, it's like there's no heaven for me necessarily, but or like you're just some like existential nihilist type guy who's like still gonna risk his life for his friends in the trenches. Is like that's more agape.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that's so hard to wrestle with because my mom actually brought up this idea, and I said you're probably being heretical, Mom, but I think you're getting closer to Christianity, because she just brought up this idea of it was probably a week or 2 weeks ago or something, and she said she was reading about Jesus, and she just had this thought, like, I wonder if he thought in his head when he said, my God, why are you forsaking me? He probably thought that was it, and he was going to hell, and this was the end of his story, and I was like, for you to say that, probably most churches would not like that. But I was like, that to me, I think that gets at more the heart of Christianity, is because that's more self-sacrificial. Like, I'm not just giving up, you're giving up everything. You're giving up your future, your afterlife, your story, because he was being labeled as just a blasphemer. Like, he's giving up his past, his present, his future, all of it. He was giving up on the cross, or willing to give up. And I'm like, that's, to me, is the most Christian, the most the ultimate display of love, and to take the sins, become the scapegoat for everyone else, and say, I'll just be the blame of all humanity, and give it all up, and say, and give that offering of forgive them, Lord, they don't know what they do. I don't know, that's just, to me it seems like the ultimate Christian response. But that's so hard to wrestle with, because then right after that I said, could you do that? And then she was like, I don't know. And it's one of those things I could say I would do it, but I haven't been faced with that question. Even I was thinking about this, and this is kind of maybe, hopefully not derailing the topic too much, but Craig, you might like this, because we talked about it a little bit in the past, but we were talking about the Marvel movies, and did I freeze up? Or are you guys there? Okay, I thought it froze for a second. But
I thought I froze, but I still heard you.
Might have been me, because it looked like but so like at the end
Marvel
of the
movies.
the Iron Man, kind of gives his life to save the world. You kind of have that whole thing playing out, and so I was thinking like, well, that's basically a very self-sacrificial move. But then they came out with the next Spider-Man movie after that, and he's giving up his story in that one. And I was like, I wonder which one's more self-sacrificial, because in that one, Spider-Man's just willingly taking on the scapegoat and giving up his, he doesn't die in it, but he's basically saying, here's my past. I'm the hero, but I'm just going to let everybody think of me as the villain and go off as being the scapegoat. And I was like, man, I wonder which one's harder to reckon with, because Iron Man, sure, he gave up his life, but he gets the nice history of being remembered as the hero that saved everybody. He's the savior, and Spider-Man's just the scapegoat. And I'm like, that's hard
Which
to.
is weird, because like if you're not around to enjoy it, why should it matter to you? Like with my friend, I'm sorry, Craig, if that was a deliberate like invitation to Craig that
Oh,
like,
no.
I
mean,
Go
hop
ahead,
in if
Craig.
you want to. No, go ahead.
I'm always debating with my friend over like he thinks it's better in some cases never to have been born or not to exist. And I always think like, if you don't exist, that can't be better for you or worse, because like for something to be better or worse, it has to be better or worse for somebody. But like in the case where you don't exist, there's nobody to be made better or worse off, kind of thing. And
Just is.
yeah, well, I mean, it's like we're and it also isn't like
Yeah.
it isn't, it isn't, it's the
Yeah.
nothingness thing. And like which like again is only like known or represented in this kind of dialectal or self-referential or recursive way. But uh yeah, like when you say like I will die, but I will be remembered as this awesome dude. It's like, well, it's not really any good if you can't attend your own funeral, kind of thing. But then again, it's like maybe he just had like the Jesus like motivation where it's like I love these people for whom I am dying so much that I don't care about the future at all, because what I have right now is already so perfect. Because right now I know that they're going to be fine, and that's all I need. The next moment or tomorrow is of no importance to me in relation to this value.
Yeah. Craig, you got any comments? Interject here. You've been quiet for a while.
It's an interesting question.
Try the
I feel like
crosses.
Craig was
Sorry, go ahead.
right. No.
Oh no, I was just saying I think that's why the cross is fascinating, because it kind of pulls in both all of those together, like you're talking about. Like he not only gives up his life, but it's like he's not even playing the hero at that point. Like Christ is the savior, but he's not in that moment. He's the scapegoat. And he's just he's not giving up his life with knowingly thinking, oh, they're gonna remember me as the guy who saved them. He's like, I'm the
Right.
it's all
yeah.
He didn't write anything down. I mean, they could have wrote whatever they wanted about him and said, here's the heretic, and we crucified him to get our lives back on track. It's like he put it kind of all on the altar, I mean, I guess you could say, well, he's God and he knew he would come back to life, but it's like I don't know.
No, I think he forgot his divinity. I think that's the point.
He laid it down. He set it
Or
aside,
he forgot it in some sense, or at least he reached that point of despair where it's like, I mean, I can reach easily points of despair where I don't care that heaven is on offer, and in that sense, I kind of go back to being just as resentful of existence as I was when I was like a nihilist and suicidal at many points, or when I was an atheist and often suicidal, and so it's like either he forgot his divinity and forgot all that he was and all that lay in store for him, or he reached a point of despair such that those things were of no account. It's like he truly descended to the depth, like, because he didn't consider his divinity something to be grasped, but he was already like he was already like the pre-existent Christ. It's like God became somehow the Son, or begot somehow the Son, and then the Son became just an ordinary man, and then that man, like, he stopped being the Messiah, and he just became just some loser who died on the cross that everybody made fun of.
Yeah.
And so there's so many descents and instances of kenosis within that kenosis, right? And I'm having another senior moment, so this is probably the time for someone to jump in.
I like that term you use. There's so many descents where he just kept descending and descending. Sorry, go ahead, Craig.
What is striking me as heartening and profound is that when God was at his most godlike, he doubted himself.
Mm-hmm.
Like
wow.
like the apex was the apex of his demonstration of his character. It has an effect on you.
Yeah.
God's timelessness is like a loop where it's like its end feeds into its beginning and its beginning feeds into its end kind of thing. And like at one one end of the pole is like the moment of like Genesis and creation. Maybe the other is like where it's like God in his like full Godhood is speaking everything into existence. And then God in his tiniest, like most mortal, minute human form is reaching even the limit of that mortality and dying. But like which comes at the end and which is the beginning? On one sense, you can say Genesis is the beginning and the crucifixion is the end. On the other, but you can also kind of like do the kind of, I don't know, reverse Big Bang or something. And
Yeah.
because it's like his being willing to do that was the condition of anything existing somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's what probably what he means when he says everything was created through him. And yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I never thought of that. But I know that's like why some theologians were saying that like what Adam and Eve saw on the tree of knowledge was Christ hanging on that tree. So the knowledge that they got was the knowledge that all this comes at a price.
Oh, I've never heard that before. Wow.
Yeah. But it's like, yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Which is maybe the price of like, like C.S. Lewis said, like if I every time I try to stab someone, my knife turned to jelly. Or like every time I stubbed my toe, some angel flew in to prevent me from doing so and rescuing me. Then it's like there wouldn't be any stakes and there wouldn't be any meaning.
Yeah.
And so there has to actually be, for there to be good, there has to be something not good. There has to be suffering. But like I don't know, like it has to exist of logical necessity. It's not just something which you can imagine existing without. You can't just, I don't know. To me, I can't imagine the good existing without, somewhere at some point, if only in memory, something not good existing. So yeah. Like maybe that's like the price.
Yeah. I have to chew on that one.
Like ultimate reality is somehow its own complement, somehow its own negation. It's the good, and it also is like its own shadow, the other against which it's defined. To be what it is, it has to be both. And in the darkness, you find the uncreated light. That's what my friend Michael said in his conversation with Nate. So like it's somehow in the darkness that it is somehow in the the crucifixion or the atonement that creation happens. At least theosis or divinization happens or something. The fulfillment of creation, something. I don't know. But like that's kind of esoteric. A lot of people would be like, like get out of here with that, because it's making the good kind of contingent now. And that's because he's making the good dependent on something, other than itself. It's making it dependent on not good. And so like the true good is like, I don't know.
Yeah.
But in fact, it always is something beyond like that kind of juxtaposition of your finite understanding of goodness and your finite understanding of its complement.
Yeah.
Because it is that kind of infinite dialectal thing that keeps whatever that word we used was.
Self-fulfilling.
It's just a self-operation kind of thing.
Okay, yeah.
I'm sorry, it's
Recursing.
not really making sense. Yeah, well,
Recursive.
just whatever. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, it's not making a whole lot of sense right now. But my friend was always asking me, like, whether the good is something. Is it something like beyond good and bad? Is there like a good beyond the good kind of thing? And the answer is kind of yeah, because the good is corresponding to like our inner sense of the infinite, and that's always like growing.
I was wondering if this mapped on to what we were talking about earlier. It seems like it does.
Yeah, it does because what we always seek outside ourselves is like our own highest understanding of the infinite, something that answers our own highest sense of the infinite.
Yeah, it's really, I'm gonna have to be thinking about this a lot because and especially if it maps on, then the idea of of God continually, the kenosis and the continual descent down further and further
You
and
see
further
it in
is
beauty. In beauty, you see what your highest sense of the infinite is.
okay. And beauty.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was when you mentioned earlier talking about the good and the how people kind of object to it. I kind of always wonder about this verse too. It says, "By this we know love, because he laid down his life for us. We also ought to lay down our lives for our brethren." Yeah, I don't know. I just kind of always thought about that. Like, could I actually know love without like you're talking about, without a backdrop for it, or how well could I know it? And is that even a continual, an infinite reciprocity of love? I don't know the right way to. I don't have the right language for it. My vocabulary is terrible. But like the love, by this we know love, and then so we know it through this self-sacrificial love, and then that is infinite within the. Do you get what I'm trying to get at here? It's a continual knowing of love through a, I don't know, pattern of it.
Could you guys convince me that infinite is the right word? Because we're talking about the highest good,
The highest good.
but I'm not sensing why it's appropriate to say infinite.
I was
'Cause-
using infinite as a terms of maybe boundless. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a different word.
Yeah, it's like highest in the sense that once you imagine the highest, like boom, it's even higher than that. But wait, now that's the highest, but wait, watch out. Now it's getting even like more amazing kind of thing. So that's the sense in which it's infinite, because it's not highest with respect to some kind of absolute reference point. It's its own reference point kind of thing, or it's a process that is
Yeah, I don't think I'm trying to think of how you I mean, I'm not using the word infinite as in reference to highest good alone. I guess maybe using it as in like endless potentialities sort of thing. Does that make sense? Right, that's the way I'm using it, I guess.
I do. I wonder if we I'm curious what you'd say if I asked you to specify what is the it that we're describing.
The it.
Right now, we might say it is blank. It's always one better than you might think. What are we
Yeah.
talking about? What are we
Oh,
love.
doing?
Love. I think in that sense I was saying love, which would be the highest good, but love is infinite, but then it's also in your finite understanding of it. It's like it's always infinite. You pull it down to a finite understanding, and then once you get it, it's like you have to leap into another infinity and keep doing that and keep. By this we know love. Like love is the infinite, and that this knowing is the finite, and you're pulling on that infinite, then you get it and you see then it's just like, I don't know, it's this process of just.
Oh, let me press back slightly.
Yeah.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'd considered, we're talking about an ideal, right? Like if we're talking about the ideal standard of
Yeah, for
beauty,
sure.
the ideal standard of beauty, let's say, if we were to say what makes the most beautiful face, and you polled 1,000 people, and you give them some sliders. Let's say they're building a character on, some character builder, and you have all these sliders. It's this amount of, this amount of nose shape, this amount of, you're adjusting parameters, right? So when we're talking about the standard of beauty, you could imagine, let's imagine just for simplicity that there's only 2 sliders, right? You can imagine there's a plane, like an XY plane, and there'd be a scatter plot. If we polled 1,000 people, there'd be kind of a scatter plot of what they all think is the most beautiful, and they would concentrate around a region, right? And in the center of that region, we could say that's the ideal.
Okay.
When you think about it like that, it doesn't seem appropriate to talk about it as an infinite, because it seems like it is discrete. Like it's more like a target and less like a continuum.
Well, I mean, like the thing is, if you have like that point, it feels like that's truly like a zero extensional point. Like you can always go further and further into the center of that point, unless that point is truly plotted with respect to like these two like very finite like, parameters, and like in which case it still wasn't the most attractive face, because like the most attractive face, like the ideal of that face, like you can't represent it finitely in any like which is weird, because you're also saying the most attractive face isn't a single face that you can behold.
Well,
it's like
the thing is that it's not as if what I'm suggesting is the ideal is actually a function of our collective sense of the ideal. So in that way, it is actually made up of the discrete measurements, because it's a statistical object.
yeah. Well, and just like when you subdivide the continuum, you end up with something measured in units. You can also actually repeat the operation and find that it can be subdivided even further. So like, we have that ideal, that collective ideal, but then it's also surpassed.
You're saying if we made the slider more and more fine grained, we would find that it is just.
But
Perhaps, yeah, if you're looking at beauty as some kind of averageness, it can get a little bit more average. We like tweak the.
You could get more precise.
Yeah.
But we don't. Do we want it more precise though? Because
No.
I think yeah. Because I think where my mind's going is like it.
I mean,
the reason,
yes, but
the reason for the precision would be to make it relatable. I think, right? Because you would want this idea of all these different beautiful women, you'd want it to actually occur in front of you, right? Is that what you're saying? Like you'd want it to have a point, to come to a point in front of you that's relatable to you. Like, because I just have this imagination of all these beautiful women, but I'd like it to actually take form or come to a point in front of me, right?
Maybe we're using the word point differently.
We probably are. Like you'd want the ideal to manifest, and then so you could relate to it. Is that
the
what
ideal of love is die to yourself, right? That's the ideal.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's like something like in that process. Oh man, totally lost hold of that thought. Probably is the time for me to go to sleep, because I'm interrupting and then I'm not even managing to express myself.
How are you using the term point, Craig? Before we
see that
I want to like
okay,
I'm really
yeah,
interested
okay,
in
so
getting in.
okay, so imagine.
Well, I'm gonna go to. I'm gonna
You gotta have
say
coffee.
goodnight to you, gentlemen.
All right.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm
Thank-
sorry for.
It was great to
talking so
talk with
much.
you, Cal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Thank
was
you
good
so
to talk
much.
to you too, Craig.
Let's do it again.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Where is Craig's story available? Is it anywhere on the internet?
I don't
Me
think
and
so.
Craig always just, as soon as we get together, we just like go into this stuff. And I've never actually gotten your story, Craig. I need to actually sit down and we can avoid all these like weird tangents we go off into and just focus on your history. And
Unless
you wanna record it.
We could do that sometime.
we need to.
What
we
is
need to get-
what is the discrete point like essence of Craig?
yeah. Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, but like seriously, what is your brief self-description?
This is an impossible task, but
To infinite to
well, yeah. If I make it as compact as possible, there's a couple things that I'm up to in general. One, by day, I do software engineering, and so I kind of live in
Awesome.
the world about that. That inclines me to be interested in abstractions almost for their own sake, and be engaged in a lot of conversation about abstractions. So that informs me pretty heavily, I think. I like that stuff, not in a profound way, but I like it. It's a good day job. And independently, what I'm up to, there's two things really that I pursue independently of that are the big ones. And one is, maybe I'll just say it's my outermost meaning making framework. I call it there's a thought experiment called the stratocarticulus, which is this object that is Jason and I have. Jason, just for your sake, this is this kind of, it's a glass table with multiple layers, and I'm working on developing this thing and formalizing it. And then secondly, I have an interest in,
Metaphorically speaking, right?
yes.
Okay. Yeah. Just want to be clear here.
And then otherwise, I'm interested in mathematics. I have another structure I'm formalizing. It's a system of algebra, because my sense is the algebra that we work with in you learn in grade school and we will use in physics and engineering is defective in some serious ways. And
do you think calculus is defective? Because it just talks about like infinitesimals that are just like, yeah, they truly have like infinitesimally small extension kind of thing. Yeah, it's just infinitely small. Just compute that.
I'm not sure quite what to think about the continuum. I suspect we have a long way to go in our thinking.
Because that's what Chris Langan was saying, where it's like he's saying the continuum is extended, but the points are zero extension, but it's made of points. It's like, that's dumb.
Yes. Well, it's related. I don't know. I don't have a strong position on that. I suspect that the fact that we think we can do an infinite number of things is probably a dead end. But what I'm interested in
But
specifically,
reality can do an infinite number of things. That's well, I see what you're saying in that. Yeah,
it can do an intractable number of things. It can't do an infinite amount of things.
intractable.
Meaning it's so much that you couldn't possibly process it, but it's not necessarily not exhaustible.
Yeah, I guess you always got to get into what those things
Well,
mean.
because we live in a universe apparently made of particles, and there's some things, even if you were to harness all the computing power of all the particles, you couldn't compute. So I think we're kidding ourselves about infinite computation. So, but it's not really what I'm concerned about. But it is.
Yeah, with infinities you always have to get fine grained on if you're talking about actual or potential kind of thing. Because yeah, the actual infinity is the contradiction in terms, but the potential infinity is what we are and what we're in.
Well, yeah,
it is manifestly possible because it's doing it right now, kind of thing.
If you want to have math that the universe could calculate, that could be calculated in the universe, then it doesn't involve infinities. So, but I'm most of my time specifically, I could set it up really quickly if you're interested, but I could also just leave it
No,
for
I'm interested.
a
I'm
different
sorry.
day.
I keep answering as though I'm not, but I am. No, I'm sorry. I am interested. I just digressed.
I think he froze. Craig, you there? Oh, no.
I'm
Okay,
sorry.
all right. No, that's fine.
Well,
Oh, you mean in
I
terms
don't
of
know if
explaining
I-
that
if I can-
project? You mean in terms of explaining that project, your formalization of algebra? Right.
yes,
And-
I could,
yeah.
I could set that up quickly if you're interested in it. but,
Yeah. Actually, I am. Interested in that.
Well, the compact version is that we have an arithmetic where anytime you have an operator, so you have an element, a set of things that you're operating on, like the natural numbers, let's say, and then you can do things to them like plus and minus. Those are the operators. So you have the elements and the operations, and the combination of those two things is what we call an algebra. And so you have the algebra, let's say, of the natural numbers and the plus operator, right? But every time you have an operator that you want to do in reverse, there's questions that you can no longer ask because they don't make sense. So for example, when you introduce minus, when you demand, okay, I want to do plus in reverse, here's minus, then the natural numbers are no longer good enough. You need the integers, you need negative numbers. So this kind of happens unrecognized by most of us in grade school, where every time you add an operator and you want to do it in reverse, you need to extend the set of numbers that you can operate on in some way so that it can answer these ridiculous questions that you've created. And so it's as if we're doing math on these objects that aren't. My claim is it's as if we're asking questions about shadows of the things that we're interested in. We're doing math on this kind of projection of something that is more fundamental. So you would know you're up to something. You would know that the alternative that you're suggesting is fruitful if it has these nice properties where we have all these problems. Anytime someone wins a prestigious medal in mathematics, for the most part, it's related to these questions that arise because of some kind of projection. Like there's a lot of projection, like questions where we can't really see. We have a sense of something going on, but we can't prove it. So I'll give you an example. We have a problem called the Riemann zeta function hypothesis in mathematics. And there's anybody who solves this can prove this hypothesis to be true or false. There's $1 million prize. It's probably the biggest problem in mathematics. And there's others of a similar character. And the way it works is, I'll use an analogy. Imagine you're watching a play in a theater, and there's a curtain lowered on one half of the stage, right? So you can only see one side. This is an analogy well, I'll continue. Imagine there's a dance going on and you can see what's going on, but we can't see what's going on over here. So we have a field of mathematics called complex analysis. So we have these graphs of functions, right? But we can't see behind the curtain. We know that if you could, there's some kind of curve, and if it continued, it would have a certain pattern behind the curtain. And if you can prove certain things about this function, know certain things about the prime numbers. And so there's all these things that are kind of linked with a very interesting correspondence. But we have to do these kind of, you get the sense always that you're working with tools that aren't quite the right tools. And that's my sense is that the problems we're dealing with are solvable problems, but it's just that we aren't using the correct set of tools. So thanks for letting me.
Like it. I
Sure.
mean, it feels very, I don't know why. I mean, it feels related, definitely very related to everything we were just talking about too.
For sure, because it's like if they solve that conjecture, that would just create some kind of new like meta conjecture or something that like it would like you answer the question, but there would probably be like a new question at that new level kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Because the question's the feminine, right?
hmm,
Yeah, it's the
yeah, it
quest,
is.
and so it'd be
Mhm.
the other infinite or however. I don't know.
Yeah. That well, see, the thing is, I never went beyond algebra. What about you, Jason? Do you know a lot about math?
No, I see. You know Abigail, right? On the Discord server.
Yeah.
I spoke to her once. And I didn't record it. I probably should
I
have,
bet
but
she knows a lot of math.
she actually said to me she wanted to get it because I asked her what she wanted to like talking about what she wanted to get into, and she wanted to get into mathematics. She said dig more deeply into that. And so I never personally I wanted I enjoyed math in school actually, and I wanted to go further, but I was put into a private school and they didn't offer anything really above algebra. I tried to take calculus, but it was like a pace work, so you had to kind of teach yourself, and it just the paces were terrible. They had like they'd give you the question and the answer and not tell you how they got it at all. And so I was like, this is not helpful of them. So I never really went that far. But it's all that to say, I don't know. She wanted to get into that though, and so I told her I needed to set her up a meeting with Craig at some point because I feel like she'd be interested in all of that.
Well, I do like math biographies. Like I read The Beautiful Mind, and I read which is the biography of John Forbes Nash Jr. Who he really was doing more kind of like economic. Well, he won the Nobel Prize for a, a contribution to economics rather than pure mathematics, but he had some outstanding contributions there too. And then also I read Perfect Rigor, which was about Grigory Perelman, who won one of those $1 million prizes for solving the Poincare conjecture.
Hmm.
And that's super. I mean, like the topology was very interesting. Just talking about like, I don't know, like you have like shapes and you have operations you can do on them, kind of thing, and trying to know like what's the limit of those operations, like what are some kind of minimal like necessary truths that I can know when I'm talking about, manipulating this kind of object in this kind of space, kind of thing. It was interesting. But no, like the problem is like I do kind of use math terms in my sort of half-assed analytic philosophy that I do, but like only at a very vague level. So you're asking me questions like, hey, is it this kind of function or is it that kind of function? It's like, dude, I haven't thought it through. Like I need the most vague like notion
Yeah.
of a function I can get away with.
I'm curious where your conception of a function and its argument is. I mean, because they're very specific terms. I'm curious where you acquired that.
Oh, I just mean like even a word is like even a verb is like a function. Like hit, that's a function. It has arguments. I hit the
Yes.
ball. I hit the ball yesterday. All those are telling me who, what, where, when about the those are
Yes.
all arguments. And the verb is like the function.
Mhm.
That's probably not satisfying
No, that's very satisfying.
no, no,
Maybe I spoke too soon. Go ahead.
it's probably not satisfying some particular field's definition of a function. But like can get away with it. Just a way of seeing.
Do you think you were exposed to that terminology in the context of linguistics?
Where was I exposed to it? I'm a speech therapist. So
Dude, that's it.
yeah. And but my well what my teacher was his background in linguistics? I don't remember.
Perhaps that's the
Um
wrong. Maybe that's the wrong. Linguistics is the wrong word, but it's syntax.
yeah, I mean everything kind of is. That was like Langen's point. Like to be intelligible to the mind, it has to like satisfy some like language like requirement of like grammaticality.
Mm.
And like everything in reality is kind of an expression that has you know variables at like different levels of generality, and they're all kind
Mm.
of filled in, and like when you have an idea and then you implement it, like that's what you're doing, is you're just like
I bet there's some really fruitful insight. There's probably a lot of insight hidden in a conversation about the difference between the way that you use the words, expression, syntax, etc., and the way a computer science scientist would use them. There's
yeah.
because I've never been exposed to those things in that context, but I totally see why it's
Well, it's not like speech therapists
natural.
are using these terms in this way either, man. It's like, because speech therapists don't speech therapists are about cutting stuff out and laminating it, stuff like that. Like,
Gotcha.
they're not really interested in this weird stuff.
I wonder if you could plug Chris Langan, because I've never heard of him, but I know that you are referencing his.
Yeah, well, Chris Langan is some dude who he's not in academia. He doesn't have any credentials. He worked as a bouncer in New York for a long time. Now he's a horse rancher. He's like, he's not somebody whom I would be in a big hurry to talk to, because he's like kind of mean, and he's like pretty like rigid, and you might say narcissistic, but it's kind of like saying someone who lost their family is depressed. Well, it's like with a good reason, because this dude is like really, really smart. In some sense, like he's claimed to be the world's smartest person. Like, no one can measure IQ really above 160, but insofar as you can measure it, he has a claim to having the highest IQ measured. But again, like, IQ is kind of less and less reliable the more standard deviations you go out. It's like you don't even really know what you're measuring anymore. And people get like these take-home tests, and like a lot of the people who score really high on those tests, like you never heard of them, and it's not really clear if they've like contributed to anywhere, or anything. But Langan, like, I mean, I am familiar with philosophers to some extent. Mostly I read secondary sources. I've not really seen anyone more interesting and more fruitful than Langan. His appreciation of the reflexive nature of ultimate reality, and kind of, I'm sure it must be similar to like Gödel, Escherbach, that kind of thing, strange loops and things like that. And there's a lot of jargon, so it's definitely not easy to read. Most people, almost invariably, when people read Langan, they come away with the idea that, oh, this guy is just a pseudo intellectual.
Mm.
Which is like, I mean, I guess fine by me, because like those same people will talk to me and be like, well, no, you have some things to say that are pretty sharp. And it's like, well, it's like, I didn't actually come up with them though, like that I got them from that guy who registers on your nervous system as a pseudo intellectual for whatever reason. But I mean, seems to me ultimately he doesn't really get that God is love. I think that there are like I was kind of I don't know, Jason, did you listen to my whole life story, all 4.5 hours of it?
Yeah,
You did?
I finished
So
it. Yeah.
because I was kind of critiquing why, like, God, I was critiquing Langan and explaining why I think God has to be love. Because Langan has this kind of harsh, like, eugenicist conception of utility and its maximization. Like what you should do to be maximally moral, and it's I don't know, it's not very nice, for lack of a better term. Like,
Sounds like it lacks romance.
he's very kind of cold and Darwinian, and like ultimately God's not really with that. Like, you can't push the fat man off the bridge to stop the trolley in heaven, because you just can't ever use people as means to ends. Like that, like heaven just doesn't build like that. Um, you can't do what's expedient over what's like can't ever sacrifice principles for the sake of, like some kind of practical exigent reality
Yeah.
kind of thing. And but I mean, see, like if Langan heard me saying all this, he'd be like, "Who is this little piece of shit?" I'm gonna tear him to shreds in the debate, which would kind of be awesome because then I could really ask him all the stuff that I wonder when it's like, if you think God is so interested, if you don't think God is love, then like why isn't he revealing himself? Why isn't he just smiting the atheists and just literally just building the panopticon so he can see so everyone can know they're being watched all the time? That's an interesting question. If God is really so concerned about the purity of the gene pool, why doesn't he do something about it? Because if that were effected, it wouldn't be any kind of satisfactory resolution to anything. Reality would still suck.
You mentioned this, there's a structure that you attributed to him. It sounded to my brain like the MCU, but it's an acronym. I wonder if you remember what that is.
Oh, the CTMU.
Tell me about the CTMU.
That's his own formalization of like not just algebra, but like everything. The theory of everything that's like a theory of itself also. And it's also God. And it's also really it's like the best theory that I mean, like the older I get, the more like sophisticated I think I get, in terms of understanding these things, the more my thinking just falls into those grooves. But it's not completely without, I asked myself the other day whether the CTMU is just one expression of the infinite, or if it's somehow like the limit of valid description or expression of the infinite. And the answer I kind of decided on was that it's an expression of the limit. And so like, which is, I mean,
Yes.
which is this, I mean, there must be more than one way of talking about it, but they would all bear certain formal resemblances to the CTMU, and then they would in
Yeah.
that sense be the CTMU if the CTMU is what he says it is. Which he says it exists at a super tautological level of generality, which is just like it's logically necessary. What he claims, he says it has the force of logical necessity. It's not something that is proven or disproven on the basis of any empirical observation. And yeah, like that would explain how you can be right in some abstract sense that yes, God maximizes utility. He maximizes generalized utility. He does whatever it is the best thing for everyone. He makes happen, the best thing, that can happen. But the question is, what is that? And does that look more like, Darwinian culling and exclusion, or does it look more like Jesus dying on a cross? Because whatever the hell Jesus did, it wasn't Darwin. It wasn't like, yeah, now I gained some relative fitness advantage over you guys because got this adaptation. And it used to be that Pharisees had control of the temple or the Sadducees, but now I do. It's my tribe that has the temple now. It's like you guys pay tribute to me. Oh, and that's my statue going up. Tear down Caesar's statue and let's make a coin with my face on it. Boom. It's like that's what the devil wanted him to do. What did Jesus do? Just went up on that hill and got crucified. And you can't make sense of that in Darwinian terms. It's anti-Darwinian, really. It's like instead of going to Wall Street, you just become a special educator. Instead of using your mathematical brilliance to become a quant and make and like work as an analyst at a hedge fund, you're teaching some slow quote unquote, you're teaching some child with an intellectual disability how to do 2 + 2, that's what
Yeah.
it is. But somehow, in terms of like, I'm wary of reducing God to this something impersonal, but it's like if you look at it in terms of like self, other, predicate, complement, and the evolution of reality as a dialectal process of self-identification, it's like there's something about that kenosis that reflects like a complete identification with the other or complement. It's like, because like, was it, I was texting this to Jason, that pride is the love of self, and agape is the love of other, like as other. Because you can love someone as like almost like an image of yourself. It's
That was
okay.
weird.
You can
How'd
love
you do
someone
that?
kind of like, you can love someone conditionally just to the extent that they're like you or they reflect what you want, or you can love them as they are,
Mhm.
and be willing to die for them.
Yeah.
And it's like that's like the love of the other as other, and it's like completely letting go of yourself,
Yeah.
in that, and it's also like transcending yourself, because like that's what an infinite self has to do. It has to always transcend itself, and you can only do that in agape, because if you don't, otherwise your soul stays small. It's not integrated with what it like truly knows itself to be. It's stuck in these kind of the narrow confinement of its false values and its narcissism and
This is, yeah, that's really interesting. That's really interesting. And that's the necessity of creating a creature with free will so it can have its own identity within that free will. So then God can
yeah,
infinitely
that's
grow
true.
through that. Because then the
Yeah, you were
infinite,
saying that in your car.
yeah, because then the infinite, but this, yeah, it's weird that it's relatable. Because then the infinite, through that love, that agape love of loving something other, then that love continually grows. It's like you're saying, the infinite keeps growing through that and becomes more, I guess, to what extent it can become more infinite, however we're
And that's
using
why
that
it's like
term.
a trinity, that it just loves every conceivable creature and calls every conceivable creature into being.
Yeah.
And then that every creature is like its own mini trinity, that it just does the same thing, kind of. It's like fractal.
Yeah. Yeah. The Trinity, that blew my mind when I started to see it as a pattern. Then I was like, okay, now it finally makes sense. It never made sense growing up in church, which is fair enough. It's like, I don't know, it's hard. I feel like it's hard to explain, especially to children, maybe. I don't know, but now that I get it, it seems so simple though. Um, but I always heard the Trinity described as well, there's just certain things we can't wrap our heads around in this life. Kind of his ways are, and I was like, oh, that's satisfying. Thanks.
No, it's like vapor, ice, and water. It's really that simple,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not, because if you take
Well,
that
yeah.
one to its limit, it's the heresy of modalism. But
Oh,
um,
okay. Yeah.
I'm just kidding. It's not
Um,
simple, but maybe it is if you're looking at it through the lens of love, right? Just like scripture, it
yeah.
seems like an intractable, like what the hell do I do with this passage? But if you look at it through the lens of love, I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes I
It's just
wonder, like,
the two. It's just two things being united under a third, because you can't have um like any two things. You can't, if you have creation, you have one thing, and then in creation, or if that thing splits off, and once God created the heavens and the earth, and the earth they're united under God, and it's like there's just always a third thing that has to hold the two together, and that could
It's
be anything.
it's the two elements of the dyad and their relationship.
Yeah, I guess, right?
yeah,
What's the name of there's the relata, and what is the word that describes the elements that are connected?
I think Ian McGilchrist said there's a relationship and there are relata, or plural
see.
of relatum,
Okay.
or
So
reland, you could say.
So I got it backwards. Relata are the elements.
Yeah, but you know how interchangeable these things kind of are. It's like, you know, it's like we were saying, like you can look at the instance as an instance of the pattern. You can look at the pattern as an instance of the instance kind of thing. Like, kind of depends on how you look at it.
Hmm.
That's the absolute relativity of the infinite right there in a nutshell kind of thing. Do you guys think this conversation was smart and good, or do you think it was stupid and dumb? That's the question for the committee.
I
like
enjoyed
it.
it.
That's good.
I enjoyed it a lot. What do you think,
I
Phil?
actually kind of enjoyed it.
Okay. Kind of
You
enjoyed it.
kind of enjoyed it. What the hell?
I know.
Well, I think the parts that were not good were the parts where I was, you know, like being inarticulate and fumbling around and being really sleepy
It was
and
good.
interrupting everyone
We bumped into some good stuff.
with
Yeah.
my half-finished thoughts. Yeah, no, I think we did.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope it wasn't too frustrating for you to, like, when I felt like you were trying to I was having to dumb it down or bring it down to a different area.
No,
but
no, I
hopefully it
mean,
wasn't.
I kind of woke up in the middle of the conversation and then I kind of, I mean, like, you know how it is. You guys must know how it is to be sleep deprived, like how kind of inconsistent it is. Like sometimes like you're totally awake and then the next moment you're just like,
Yeah.
you're like spreading peanut butter on the cereal box or something, you know, like.
Yeah. That's a great way of describing it. Yeah. For sure. But yeah, I enjoyed this a lot. Thank you guys so much for doing this. Hopefully we can do it again soon. So
Yeah, well, it's awesome to meet Craig. And I did kind of learn more about you. Like, that's pretty awesome that you're a programmer, that you're a mathematician. You are a mathematician if you're like formalizing algebra. And I guess I would just ask also, like, what, like, do you have a denomination? Or are you just like vaguely Protestant? Or
You know, how do I say this? I really, I have a Christian hat that I wear, but my meaning making system isn't distinctly Christian. Although that it's probably mincing words to really say one or another. It's not.
are you like more of a perennialist, you would say?
I'm not sure what that means.
Perennialist is like, Jason, do you want to define it? Should I
oh,
take
Google.
a
I'm
stab?
gonna Google it right now. You can, or
Well,
unless you could define
well,
it.
I mean, I can try to define it. Like perennialist is just asserting that there are these kind of universal spiritual truths in all religions, and that it's not that any one of them stands at the center, but again, the the which one is most true is sort of a matter of perspective.
I don't think it's a matter of perspective. I wouldn't categorize myself that way.
Oh.
If I had to give you something, if I had to commit to something, I'd say that it's not a matter of perspective. It's a matter of time and place, because the underlying thing, let's say, is evolving. So you might ask, one way to say this, the religious question, let's imagine we're on a playground and you're asking, what's the best game to play on this playground? But the playground is changing. The best game changes. But that doesn't mean that there's no, you would say, higher order
But
principles.
see, if so, okay, so like check it out. So like, if the playground is like any reality, and the playground of playgrounds is like ultimate reality, and so like that, it's like one could say like, obviously certain playgrounds are optimized for certain games, but it's an open question. It sounds like to you it's an open question whether the playground of playgrounds is optimized for any particular game.
Well, there's degrees of viability, like of certain games. Some games are, some playgrounds do not afford certain games. They don't lend themselves to games. There's totally inviable games, and there's a spectrum of viability.
And see, I think like, because I was saying this with Jason, like if the nature of like ultimate reality was such that like you should always behave in the most warlike way, you know, then like your ultimate war example wouldn't be Jesus, it would be like Genghis Khan. But Christianity has somehow claimed that like the game of games is love, and God is love.
Totally, that's
Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
but it's very specific. It also comes with a specific set of stories that teach us a certain set of abstractions.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a rule set. So it's not just it's love. You might very well have another tradition that says love is the primal virtue, but it may have a different set of idioms and aesthetic associated with it.
Like may have one, but there isn't one.
We could imagine that we live in a world where we have a comparable tradition that has a similar, let's say, a similar set
So like
of values.
possibly there could be one, but there isn't actually one.
It doesn't. Well, maybe there is one. Currently, maybe we could point to an example, but you could imagine a tradition that had all the same value hierarchy as Christianity, but a totally different set of aesthetics or symbols. Or
That's true.
and the thing is, the high. How do I put this? There's an Escher-like relationship between the game and the playground, because how do I put this? Imagine that we live in a universe where you don't have pain receptors. And you'd have a totally different set of viable games. So for example, we have a lot of, let's say, wisdom in Christianity that is related to pain and suffering.
Mm.
But you can imagine living in a universe that's such that like the universe is very particular. Do you see what I mean? We have a set of, we have rule sets viable rule sets that are a function of what the playground is like. When I say the playground, I mean the universe, like the physical place we're inhabiting.
Yeah. So are we talking about physical pain and suffering? Because love is not an avoidance of suffering, is the weird thing. Like, because I'm wondering if love, like, as you're saying, the playground and the game, if the game was love, that would transfer over to any playground, I would think.
Well, it wouldn't transfer to any playground.
It wouldn't.
It's a playground. You could call it an arena also. Like the arenas, they yield different games. I have this.
So you're saying that there's a playground where you can't play the game of love on that playground kind of thing.
Or maybe you could play it. Yeah, exactly what you said. Or maybe it's just not the most viable game at a particular time.
I guess
So
in my head,
Christianity is going to say that is always the game on whatever playground, because the playground of playgrounds is like optimized for that game.
I think this is a weakness of Christianity, is that it doesn't seem to have a really explicit or robust self-updating mechanism.
that where my mind goes is that you could have a playground where you play different games, but it wouldn't exist without love. Like love holds the playground together. So if you get in a playground where, like Cal is talking about, the objective is to be like Genghis Khan, then pretty soon your playground's gone, right? I mean, your whole arena's gone.
Yeah. Well, but you only say that because of the particular features of the universe that we live in.
Okay.
Like you could imagine one where love is not.
What would be
if there was a universe, let's say,
would you have to not be able to suffer? Is there a universe where you can not suffer?
You could conceive of one.
No, I can't.
I'm trying
Well,
to do as
Because
well.
without suffering, there's no good. And without good, I mean, if there's good, then there's suffering. If there's suffering, then there's, I mean,
Huh.
you, yeah.
Right. So, but you're asserting, you're kind of presupposing, you're presupposing a certain rule set. Like
I'm
it's like you're saying,
presupposing that
it's
the
like,
good and suffering will exist in any conceivable universe. Absolutely.
well, it's akin to saying something like that. Like, let's call it viability, or let's call it fitness, the fitness of a game, or the viability of a game. Like it's kind of like we're saying good good and bad. There's kind of these ethical connotations tied up with it, but that's not. Um, it sounds like kind of what you're saying is like, oh, but if the universe didn't have hoops in it, then we couldn't play basketball. And I can't imagine a universe where we couldn't play basketball.
Well, I'll tell you why I can't imagine.
Mhm.
Because if you're gonna do something, it's, that there has to be a reason why you do it.
Yes.
There's no consciousness that doesn't have a reason for doing what it does. I mean, can you imagine such a consciousness?
Well,
Can you imagine a consciousness that doesn't do anything, for example? And if you can't, it has to do something. Can you imagine a consciousness which does something for no reason, or it can't have reasons for doing what it does?
I could contrive one. I mean, I feel
Tell
like
me how.
what's funny is where
you can think of a consciousness that doesn't do anything, a consciousness that exists in perfect stillness.
well,
Doesn't change.
I could imagine let's say you could imagine you could imagine a universe where there isn't consciousness per se.
No. No, because what would it mean that there was a universe existing and there was nothing perceiving it? That would be the completely non-perceptual object, the mind-dependent object again.
We're getting into a place where what we're exploring is the generality of the generality of possible playgrounds. And so what I'm not claiming is that there's an infinite set of possible playgrounds. We're kind of in it. We're off on a rabbit trail that really
Well, you think that my statements equate to certain things, but I'm not sure that they do. And I'm trying to, get narrow on certain questions. Like, if you think that it's possible for there to be something that exists outside of consciousness, I thought we kind of went over that.
Well, not necessarily. Well, I'll put it this way: the playground is variable, and that is at the core of what I'm claiming.
Don't you think that there are constraints within which it varies?
Likely so. I think that's a huge part.
So I'm claiming there are certain constraints, but you're not acknowledging them as constraints.
I would acknowledge them as constraints, but it's just not something.
No, the specific constraints that I'm saying, the things that I'm saying are constraints,
related
are
to
like there's
consciousness.
always good and there's always suffering.
There may not, well, let's say suffering, for example. If you didn't have pain receptors and you didn't have, you can conceive of a situation where you wouldn't feel pain, you wouldn't have the sensation of suffering. We could
Physical
live.
pain.
We could live in a
The
universe.
question is whether suffering is the same thing as physical pain. I'm not sure it is.
So this is a question I really don't concern myself with for an extended amount of time, but we could. What I'm getting at is we should recognize the very the peculiarities of the world that we live in. It doesn't have to be this way. Like we're vertebrates. We have, we have a set of features, and we live in a certain set of conditions. That it wasn't self-evidently. It didn't have to be this way. But
no, you're right. But you may not be appreciating the fact that there are certain constraints within which we live that actually don't break, that they would be in any other universe, and that those constraints might be more specific than you currently understand.
That may be, I think that's probably worth exploring, but it's really not. It's not really fundamental to what I'm interested in. because I'm interested in something that works here in this universe, like first and foremost.
Okay, I'm sorry, because I thought the point was that the universes can vary.
It's not
Not
about,
that-
it's less about the universe varying. It's about the fact that what it would have been like to be a viable game as a human in, sub-Saharan Africa 100,000 years ago. There may be different viable games for that person. The games that were viable then in that place may not be viable here and now.
That is true.
So the point of the changing playground is to draw attention to the fact that if you have a game, it may be more or less viable in different times and places, because the playground, we live in a universe that is evolving, and not only evolving independently, but evolving in response to the games that are being played in it.
Yeah, I guess the question would be, what does any given game become if played long enough? If you have the prisoner's dilemma, but it truly never ends, does it ever make sense to defect? And, if your life is cut short at some point, well, then maybe I get some advantage by screwing people over and treating it like it's zero sum. If my life actually never ends, does that actually dictate some change in strategy? And does that change look more and more like agape the longer that game is extended out into, you might say, eternity? That's
Well,
the question.
I'm with you. The reason I'm interested in conversations about Christianity is because I think Christianity is a very viable game. In fact, it may be a.
Well, why won't you convert and say my words at the point of the sword? Because I swear I'm just gonna have to execute you as a heretic right now. You're not. No, I'm just messing with you. No, I mean, no, I mean that's kind of like what we're exploring, right? Because we all kind of thought Christianity was like one thing growing up. Like, I wasn't raised Christian, I was a Hare Krishna, but I thought it was like, like you say this prayer to Jesus and you say like, I was a sinner, but now I believe in you, so that doesn't count anymore. And then now I'm, like once saved, always saved kind of thing. But then it's like the deeper you go into it, the more you realize it's actually like weirdly related like to the infinite itself, and like kind of, or maybe not. Like, you have to like explore it, but and you wonder like, am I just seeing Jesus everywhere because I just have Jesus shaped glasses on, or is this something actually weirdly to do with like the nature of the infinite? Right. So like, that's kind of obviously what we're all like exploring.
It seems very related to whether or not we want to die on a hill that says whatever this truth is that we're trying to describe. Let's say this rule set. Is this rule set fundamental, or is it perspectival? Right.
Or is as close as you can get to fundamental necessarily, really something more like perspectival, right? But yeah, no, it's getting late. Maybe I should let you gentlemen go rather than continually
This is great.
dragging or dragooning you into philosophical, pointless philosophical.
No, it's not pointless at all. It's fun.
Yeah, they definitely have a point. We're getting somewhere.
Yeah, I can already tell I'm gonna feel like so terrible tomorrow, because like if
I'm
I don't
sorry.
get in bed like before 9, like really, like I always feel like so bad. But that's not you guys' fault. It's my fault.
I'm sorry, Cal.
I chose to burn midnight oil that I don't actually have.
Well, I hope you feel better than you think you will.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thank you very much, Craig. And it was a great pleasure. And I hope sometime you can teach me more about mathematics, because I really do, even though I don't know math, like I'm actually really interested in the higher math and like the things that people do, and like the people who solve different prove different conjectures and things like that. Because I think it's like super interesting. Because I think those are probably like the smartest guys like who've ever lived, guys and gals. at least under, like your kind of IQ definition of intelligence, which is it's a pretty meaningful definition of intelligence. It overlaps a lot with what we usually mean by that. So yeah, anyway, and
Let's keep talking.
Jason already
Yeah.
knows that I'm a fan of his channel and I'm down for more conversations.
Yeah, anytime. This has been fun. Yeah, anytime you
I
guys
feel
are
like
free.
Well, Jason, I got to thank you. It's always fun when we do this. Thanks for setting up. I know that you kind of like, I felt like you kind of like refereed us a little bit. And I feel like you kind of like just set us up to have like a butt sniffing conversation. But man, I appreciate you like hell, man. I
Well,
really
I
hope
feel like I just when I talk to both of you, I feel like you both just I feel like the more we get into conversations and bad ideas around, we'd be able to dig deeper on a lot of issues. And I think things will map on, like even mathematics will map onto the philosophy ideas for sure. And I think these, I don't know, I just think it'll be really fruitful, especially in the long run, the more we get comfortable and everything after the butt sniffing, whatever you want to call it. All right, guys.
thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you guys. Thanks for setting time aside. It's been a blast.
All right, thank you guys.
Guys.
Yeah, have a good night. Get some sleep.
Good night. God bless.
Yeah.